Fei followed through with her plan and took Tina to the hotel. But in the lobby, they were unable to see Han Sen or Han Yen. Lee Dongmu was not fond of such events, so he had called Han Sen over to a battle room that was located in the hotel. Han Sen, let me see if your skills have degraded over the past 10 years, Lee Dongmu said as he stood on the battleground. He clutched a practice dagger. Han Sen stepped onto the stage with a practice sword, and he said, even if I didn't improve in the least, I certainly wouldn't get worse. Lee Dongmu didn't respond. He simply came forward to attack with his dagger. Friends like Han Yin, Fang Yuanyuan, and Zhao Mingze were in the bleachers watching. Hong Lianxuan was excited while he watched, too. I wonder if Senior Han or Demigod Yi is stronger? Fang Yuanyuan sounded confident when he said, of course it will be Dongmu. Little Yan's brother is strong, but he hasn't fought in 10 years. He must have grown rusty over the course of all that time.
Han Yan smiled.
No matter how rusty he gets, my brother is incapable of losing. Zhao Mingze quickly said, they are both legends in the alliance. They are both so powerful, it's impossible to determine a victor. While they were discussing the two combatants, the intensity of the fight flared up. Lee Dongmu's assassination skills were incredibly powerful, and he could most certainly one-hit kill an opponent. Although the practice dagger wouldn't let him kill his opponent, in Lee Dongmu's hands, it was still really dangerous. The audience was very close to the stage where the combatants fought, but even still, they were unable to see how Lee Dongmu attacked. Whenever he struck, it was as if his body disappeared. Han Yin and Zhao Mingze were already demigods, but not even they could see where Lee Dongmu went.
Young.
Han Sen flipped his blade and thrust it backwards. Then, he heard the clang of metal, preceding the appearance of Lee Dongmu and his dagger. A second later, Lee Dongmu disappeared again, up until Han Sen made another move. The strike bellowed another clang, and Lee Dongmu's presence was revealed once more. Lee Dongmu was practically invisible, like a ghost that was circling Han Senator, but despite that, Han Sen was still able to use his sword to block each attack. They are so good. I wonder why I cannot be strong like them. Hong Lianxuan's eyes were wide open. Han Yin, your big brother is good. But my Dongmu is still better, Fang Yuanyuan said. People often say a woman in love is blinded. I can see the truth to that statement, Han Yin wittily retorted. Don't you see your brother is being suppressed? He can't fight back. He hasn't even attacked once. Fang Yuanyuan smiled. Han Yin looked at Zhao Mingze and said, I fear Yuanyuan won't listen to me. Perhaps it would be best if you explain. Zhao Mingze was fixated on the fight, but when she called to him, it snapped him out of his daze. He looked strange. My father once said there are only a handful of people he admires in the alliance. One of these people is Han Senator in truth. Han Sen is the one my father admires the most. His training abilities are extremely strong, or so my father said. So, I feel rather bad about this. I was hoping to fight Senior Han myself, so I could show my father. But seeing this today, I know that even with another 10 years of practice, I would be unlikely to defeat him. Han Yin was surprised hearing this. She never thought Zhao Seventh would think of Han Sen in such a way. She couldn't believe it and asked, Chairman Zhao thinks that highly of my brother? Zhao Mingze was given a wry smile. My father and your brother once held a grudge. My father might not know his friends or family well, but he most certainly knows about his enemies. He spends more time researching his opponents than he spends with his own family. And Senior Han is the opponent that he has researched the most. He spent a long time studying him, ignoring his family in the meantime. You've talked a lot, but you haven't said Senior Han is as strong as Dongmu, Fang Yuanyuan said. Zhao Mingze went on to say, Demigod Yi is strong, and his assassination skills are very powerful. Taken at face value, you might say he is the strongest demigod. You have a lot to say about both.
Han Yan smiled.
Zhao Mingze looked at Fang Yuanyuan and said with a wry smile, that being said, I'm not very knowledgeable about the arts of assassination. I can't give a detailed review of his skills. But in my personal opinion, I thought assassinations were a one-hit kill affair. Lee Dongmu has attacked at least 100 times, and he has been unable to deal any damage to Senior Han. For someone who specializes in assassination, that is bad. Zhao Mingze didn't say it directly, but he clearly meant that if an assassination wasn't a single-hit kill, it was a failure. Han Sen stood in the same place he had started, and he had yet to make a move. He used his sword to continue blocking each and every strike delivered by Yi Dongmu. Zhao Mingze was shocked, but he didn't want to say anything ill in front of Fang Yuanyuan. Fang Yuanyuan was in love, so it was obvious why she was so confident in Yi Dongmu's abilities. But she wasn't stupid, and she knew what Zhao Mingze had meant. Little Yin, is Senior Han really this strong? I thought he was left adrift someplace in the galaxy for 10 years. Fang Yuanyuan looked at Han Yin with confusion. Han Yin smiled and said, they have both suppressed their power to fight here. If this was for real, it would be difficult to tell. Fang Yuanyuan heard this and looked happy. Han Yin and Zhao Mingze, on the inside, were both thinking that being in love just made women dumber. Everyone knew Han Yin was merely comforting her. It's no wonder that Senior Han is the pride of the Black Hawk Military Academy. He is strong, Hong Lianshuan complimented. Yi Dongmu kept on attacking, knowing he had already lost. But he kept on going, wanting to find out just how long Han Sen would last like this. Given 10 years, Yi Dongmu believed he must have caught up with Han Sen, or even surpassed him by now. But now that they were fighting, he realized that Han Sen's power would always remain unpredictable. As they fought, an explosion suddenly sounded from the outside. The entire battle room was shaken, and then more explosions sounded. It was as if multiple areas of the hotel were being blown up, one after another. Shaifai didn't see Han Sen in the lobby, and she was too lazy to go and find him. So, she stood with Tina and issued a command through her communicator. All across planet Fantas, explosions began to erupt. The entire planet was suddenly gripped in terror. Many of the humans that had gone there on holiday began to scramble and fight their way back to the landing pads to try to escape. Because Planet Fantas was a privately owned business, there was no security department controlled by the Alliance. The security teams there were run by the Zhao family, and they did their best to evacuate people and determine the locations that were exploding. Explosions began to rock Han Sen's hotel, causing the people inside to run away from it as quickly as possible. Han Sen and those he was with promptly did so as well, and they got a glimpse of what was happening. Shaifai and Tina saw Han Sen exit the hotel, and immediately, Shaifai looked at Han Sen with a desire to kill. Tina held her back and said, Annie Shaifai, let me deal with Han Senator, you take care of the rest. Shaifai wished to say something, but Tina was already running forward. She had summoned a big sword. At only 1.65 m tall, she was quite short, and the sword she was wielding was actually bigger than she was. It was quite a funny sight, seeing the mismatch of height and equipment. You weren't allowed to use weapons on Fantas, and the AI patrols in the sky immediately began swarming towards Tina with their laser beams firing. Tina began effortlessly swinging her greatsword as this occurred. The greatsword, after a few slashes, cut through and destroyed all the AI drones. Tina didn't even spare a glance at the AI she was cutting down, and her focus remained solely on Han Sen. Han Sen and the others saw Tina coming, and Zhao Mingze looked incredibly angry. Who are you? How dare you mess up Planet Fantas? Are you unaware that this place is a business belonging to Angel Jean? Tina did not say a word, and she directed her greatsword at Han Sen. Zhao Mingze was fuming mad. He summoned his Geno Core named Angry Wind Spear and went straight for Tina. The Angry Wind Spear came down against her steel greatsword and was immediately broken. The steel greatsword proceeded forward, now coming down on Zhao Mingze. He was going to be cut in half. Zhao Mingze was shocked. Some blood spilled from his mouth, and he was unable to dodge. He was going to be cut in half. Yi Dongmu leaped to Zhao Mingze and pulled him backward, saving him from certain death. All the classmates from the Black Hawk Military Academy were shocked. Zhao Mingze was a demigod, and his Geno Core had been destroyed just like that. It was scary, seeing a little girl who looked no older than 15 wielding such power. Yi Dongmu grumbled and summoned his own Geno Core dagger. Then, he tried to stab Tina, but all of a sudden, he found that another woman had appeared in front of him. Lady, kill Han Sen now. Shaifai shouted at Tina as she blocked Yi Dongmu. Okay. Tina had moved in front of Han Sen by now, ready to swing her greatsword. Han Sen stared at Tina, his Dongxian aura firing on all cylinders. But strangely, he could not feel Tina's life force. He couldn't help but frown. Seeing the steel greatsword, though, Han Sen could at least tell that she was a demigod, and that her weapon was a Geno core. "Brother, let me do this," Han Yen said as she summoned a strange-looking knife. It was bigger than a dagger, but the sword was extremely thin and semi-transparent. Han Sen knew this was Han Yan's Geno core. She created it with the falsified Sky Sutra. It was called Shi-King Blade, and it had strong causality powers. Shi-King Blade was on the bronze and silver Geno leaderboard, and after her tests, it had actually managed to reach the top 5. It was not much worse than Six Paths Sword. It might not have been number 1, but it was scarily powerful, all the same. Han Yan's falsified Sky Sutra and Shi-King Blade were capable of killing creatures in the 4th God Sanctuary. Her critical hits were something no creature could block.
Young.
The steel greatsword came against the Shi-King Blade, and Han Yen and her weapon were sent flying. Han Yen was in shock. Han Yen had aimed at Tina's body, and even with the girl's greatsword in front of her, the falsified sky powers should still have hit her. The fact that it had actually been deflected by the greatsword was quite unbelievable. The scarier thing was that such strength was being displayed by a little girl. Han Yen was sent flying, and her silver Geno core was webbed with cracks. Han Sen caught Han Yen, using Yin Yang Blast to absorb the force that had attacked her so she wouldn't be hurt. Then, he put her back down. "Who are you? Why do you want to kill me?"
Han Sen asket Tina.
Han Sen helped Han Yen remove the damaging force, for he knew that the lady foe was at least super in class. It was unbelievable. Only Luo Haitang, Gu Qingqing, and various members of Blood Legion had achieved superclass. It was difficult to believe that a little girl such as that was showcasing such power. "Because you have to die." Tina spoke, then immediately swung her greatsword. Han Sen's back shone with the color red. Jewel-like butterfly wings washed him with a ruby color. Han Sen drew Taya and brought it against the greatsword. When the two came into contact, the shockwave unleashed was enough to level the buildings all around. The aircraft that were parked nearby were all blown up. "Senior Han is cool. That's such a powerful woman. And yet she is unable to do anything," Hong Lianshuan said. "It's too dangerous to remain here. We should get back to the hotel. There's a defensive program there that can defend against the attacks of a demigod," Zhao Mingzi said. "What about Yi Dongmu?" Fang Yuanyuan asked, seeing that Yi Dongmu was locked in combat with Shei-Fi. Yi Dongmu had a gemstone Geno core, but he was being suppressed by Shei-Fi. His assassination skills were incapable of killing her. "Yi Dongmu, they are coming for me. You should go back." Han Sen saw Shei-Fi and Tina, and he could clearly see Shei-Fi was Ashura. The little girl was definitely a human. He could tell this because she was using a Geno core. Not many people were able to put these two races together to fight, and only the new community had a proper grudge with Han Sen now. Both the human and the Shura were wielding power equivalent to that of a superclass being. It was almost unbelievable. It's not weird to have a superclass residing someplace in the new community, but why are there so many? The way Shuras practice makes it difficult for them to become a 4th-ranked fighter. It is incredibly rare for one of them to reach the 4th rank, and it was believed that only 5 Shuras had done so. Why would such elites end up fighting for the new community? Han Sen thought to himself. He thought something was wrong. "Yuan, follow after them," Yi Dongmu said coldly as he leaped around in battle. But Fang Yuan watched as Yi Dongmu continued moving around, not doing direct battle with Shei-Fi. If he hadn't had spatial powers, he would have been heavily damaged by now. Fang Yuan had confidence in Yi Dongmu, but she knew the circumstances were still dire. "Go," Yi Dongmu said. His voice was stern. Yuan, let's go. With my brother here, they'll both be fine," Han Yen comforted her. "There are cameras. We can watch what is occurring from there." Zhao Mingzi and the others all tried to convince Fang Yuan to go inside. When she did, and they reached the bottom floor of the safe zone, Zhao Mingzi booted up a machine. A direct video feed appeared. The hotel grounds were soaked in the constant flashing of swords. The hardy ground below was ruined with deep clefts, and the buildings surrounding the fight were being torn apart. Buildings that were a dozen floors high were being lopped in two, causing the earth to quake. A demigod's power is too scary. Is she a demigod too? Hong Lianchuan asked. Everyone felt calmer now. The scary lady, though she looked very strong, was being suppressed by Han Sen. It's no wonder he's called Senior Han. He drifted in the barrens for 10 years, and despite that, he came back just as strong. The others all complimented him. Zhao Mingze watched the video feeds, but he looked strange. He was a demigod, so he could see and notice some things that the others couldn't. Han Sen's powers were not just scary. Zhao Mingze had seen many gemstone creatures in the fourth god's sanctuary, but compared to Han Sen, they all now seemed weak. Had he already managed to reach super status 10 years ago? Dad was right. This man can practice like crazy. Zhao Mingze thought to himself as he stared at Han Sen battling. Idomu was not doing as well, by comparison. His body repeatedly flashed as he put his space power and Geno core on full throttle. Even so, he was unable to damage Shaifai. He had found himself injured, and it made Feng Yuanyuan worry a great deal. But still, Idomu did not think of retreating. His eyes gleamed with fire, and he managed to go even faster. Annoying fly. Shaifai looked at him with disdain as she swung her sword. The Shura practiced raw physical strength, and Idomu had the ability to teleport. There was no effective way for her to end her opponent quickly, but she did know that it cost a lot of energy for him to teleport around the way he was. Idomu had not reached superclass yet, and he wouldn't last much longer the way he was going. You'll be dead the moment you tire. Shaifai then looked over to Tina and Han Senator. She was shocked by what she saw. How? Is Tina really being suppressed by Han Sen? Did he reach superclass? Shaifai knew full well how powerful Tina was. Although Tina didn't have much experience, she had the scariest father in the galaxy. The chairman had helped Shaifai become a fourth-rank Shura, so it was difficult to imagine how powerful Tina really was, given the fact she was the chairman's daughter. Even Shaifai didn't dare say she could beat Tina in battle, but there she was, getting suppressed. Powerful sword skills. It is no wonder why Naga failed. They cannot fight a human like that. This is scary. Shaifai was happy she had brought Tina along now. Shaifai had believed she'd be able to take on Han Sen alone because she did not expect him to have reached superclass. According to the plans she had made, she had already failed the mission, though. No matter the result, punishment would await. But with Tina there, things had a chance of turning out differently. Her powers weren't stronger than Han Sen's, but she carried an item that bestowed her the powers of a god. Although she was too weak to use it as efficiently as was possible, she knew it might be enough to at least kill Han Sen. Miss, it is almost time. We have to kill him now, Shaifai shouted at Tina. Tina was annoyed, and she was confident in her own powers. Aside from her father, nothing and nobody else ought to have compared to her. She didn't expect herself to get suppressed by Han Sen, despite giving it her all. Tina really was getting annoyed. It did not matter what skill she tried to use, her casting would always be interrupted. She had to cancel and move or otherwise risk a blow. That feeling of not being able to finish casting her skills really annoyed her. Stupid human. You will pay for your rudeness. Tina suddenly retreated, as her forehead shone and unleashed a bright white light. Suddenly, a white crystal armor began to envelop her entire body. The crystal armor made her look holy, but when Han Sen felt the energy coming from it, it was shockingly strong. Han Sen's pupils grew smaller the moment his eyes saw the armor. It was familiar to him. The armor reminded Han Sen of the black crystal armor he possessed in his Sea of Soul. They were visually distinct, but the power inside Tina's armor was unmistakably similar to the armor set Han Sen had. Ignorant human. Prepare to be judged by God. Tina screamed to Han Sen as a scary power exploded. She disappeared and reappeared again, directly before Han Senator, her greatsword, was ready to come down on him. It was just a set of armor, but it increased her power and speed by an incredible amount. It was difficult to believe this was real. While Shaifai was shouting at Tina, Idomu's eyes went cold. His speedy body suddenly unleashed an unbelievable power. It was like all the speed and power he could possibly possess was let out in a single moment. Buzz. His dagger and his body combined. The sky was sundered, and the fabric of space was drawn tighter. The dagger was thrust into Shaifai's chest. Seeing the dagger impaled through her chest, Shei suddenly laughed scornfully. Her hand was fast lightning, and she gripped the dagger and said, "You have a death wish, trying to play tricks on me." In the next second, Shei grip on the dagger tightened as her face changed. She had made a slip. The dagger she thought she had grabbed hold of wasn't the real threat. It was a shadow. As this occurred, Yi Dongmu's expressionless face appeared directly behind her. He swung his true dagger, plunging it deep into her back. Fang Yuan was incredibly excited, seeing this victory. She couldn't even speak straight. Hong Lianxuan shouted, "Dongmu God, good job." Letting herself get distracted before an assassin is a death wish, Zhao Mingzi said. Blood began to ripple and pour from her punctured back, but Yi Dongmu did not look relieved. His dagger was stuck, as if it had gotten caught on a bone or something. Yi Dongmu wanted to pull it free, but it refused to move. Shei swung the blade in her hand, and Yi Dongmu knew he'd have to leave his weapon and fall back. Shei turned around, not caring about the dagger sticking out of her back. She spoke to Yi Dongmu, saying, "I underestimated you. Cheap human. You should be proud of the fact you were able to damage me." After that, Shei body began to exude a horrible power. She slashed towards Yi Dongmu at a speed that was greater than before.
No.
That sure a woman's body is similar to a super demigod's. Yi Dongmu is strong, but he would have to be superclass to insta-kill her. He isn't powerful enough to reach superclass, so he was unable to kill her.
Han Yan throv ned.
What do we do? Fang Yuan was going to cry. Yi Dongmu could only dodge, and after that last discharge of might, his speed and teleportation abilities had suffered. He could be killed by Shei at any given moment. And at the same time, Tina was clad in her crystal armor. The greatsword she wielded was coming right past Han Sen's face to cleave through his chest. Han Sen frowned, but he didn't panic. When he spun, it looked like he had dodged that close call by magic. Boom! The steel greatsword came crashing through the air, bringing devastation to the ground he'd been standing on. The crater that formed was 1,000 miles deep, and it was as if she had cracked the entire planet. That strike caused the entire planet to vibrate. Mountains shook in their place, and the seas went wild and tumultuous. Countless more buildings were brought down to their knees, all across Fantas. Everyone was shocked, unable to believe their eyes. She was far stronger than the demigod that was said to have blown up a star-class battleship with her own bare hands. That woman, is she human? Hong Lianxuan could barely speak. Everyone, Han Yin and Zhao Mingzi included, looked pale. They could not say a single word. That was a strength far beyond the capabilities of any known human, and no one could believe this really was the result of a human strength. Han Sen didn't look good. The power Tina used was more than he could fathom. She was stronger than Gu Qingqing. The crystal armor. That power belongs to the armor. That isn't her strength.
Han Sen stert at Tina's armor.
The armor bestowed an unlimited power upon Tina. It was like the judgment of God, just as she had said, and it shouldn't have been allowed to exist in that world. Han Sen could sense that Tina was struggling to use the armor efficiently, though. The true power of the armor was stronger than the strike she had tried to deliver. Han Sen had a similar crystal armor, but he didn't know how to use it in the way Tina was using hers. Of course, Han Sen didn't know if the crystal armor in his Sea of Soul was the same type as Tina's. It was similar, but there were some noticeable differences. As Han Sen pondered this, the second strike was already on its way. The power and speed that carried it were immense. It far exceeded Gu Qingqing's power. Han Sen could not use his own pure strength to deal with her, so he used the Dongxin Sutra and went through the motions of his Phoenix techniques. He was gunning at max capacity. With his movement and judgment capabilities, he effectively dodged her attacks. Fantas had been scarred with countless marks, and the planet had pretty much been ruined. Fortunately, many of the humans there had managed to evacuate via the airships. Otherwise, the earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions the sword had caused would have been responsible for countless fatalities. Fortunately, it was a vacation planet for the high class. People that came there were rich and their numbers few. If this was a residential planet, the civilians wouldn't have been able to escape. But there were still people who hadn't been able to escape into an airship in time. As they saw the devastation that was being caused by the sword, They thought it was only a matter of time before Tina caused the entire planet to detonate. Tina was so annoyed. Her strength was supreme, but she was unable to hit Han Senator. It was as if he was able to predict her every move and dodge the same second she committed to it. Luckily, that woman is fighting Senior Han Senator. If that was me out there, I'd have died 1,000,000 times already. Hong Lianshuan's face turned pale. The others all had the same thought, especially Zhao Mingze. He was currently admiring his father's foresight. Long before Han Sen had achieved such power, Zhao Seventh was already capable of seeing him as a profound enemy to have. Not everyone could do that. Tina missed again, and her eyes squinted. She didn't slash at Han Sen this time. Her swing was directed at the hotel. Han Sen's face changed. He didn't care much for the lives of others, but Han Yin was in there. Their safe zone might have blocked the attack of demigods, but it wouldn't withstand Tina's strength. It's no wonder. That thing is the chairman's Geno armor. She might not be able to wield its full strength, but it's already so frightening. It really is the only sort of power a god could have. Shei-Fi looked at the sword strikes and complimented what she saw. Han Sen was still alive and had not been killed yet, but Shei-Fi could see that he was underneath the incoming sword strike. Shei-Fi felt incredibly happy, and she thought to herself, I can't believe Han Sen was that difficult to kill. It is lucky she brought the chairman's Geno armor with her. If she hadn't, the mission would have been a failure and I would have been punished. Seeing Tina slash through the emptiness, Shei-Fi was shocked. Then, she understood. Planet Phantus had been wholly destroyed, but the hotel itself was fine. It wasn't really damaged, and Shei-Fi understood what was happening. Han Sen's sister and the others had only just entered the hotel, but Han Sen had saved it from annihilation. Scary human. Even as the lady is attacking, he can still formulate plans. He led her attacks to avoid the hotel. If the human doesn't die here, he will surely be a great threat to the new community. It's lucky she was smart enough to notice his plan. If he is unable to block her attack, Han Yin will be killed in the hotel. What will he decide? Shei-Fi thought. Han Sen saw Tina slash through the hotel. His face changed, but he did not stop. He stood before that sword strike to try his best to block it and stop its descent upon the hotel. Tina, seeing Han Sen directly in front of her, was delighted. She exerted more force to drive her strike harder. She hadn't planned to kill anyone else, and she just went for the hotel to get Han Sen to stop dodging her attacks and confront her.
No.
Han Yin saw Han Sen stand directly in front of Tina's sword and screamed. Hong Lianshuan and the others did not say a word. The incoming strike was too strong, and even Han Sen wouldn't be able to withstand it. Han Sen was clearly using his own body as a shield for them. Perhaps Han Sen was only doing it for Han Yin, but they all felt the same. Seeing Tina's shining greatsword coming down towards Han Sen's body, even Fang Yuanyuan hoped a miracle might intervene. Amidst that scary light, Han Sen's body that was flashing red began to melt into it. Then, they couldn't see anything. That power destroyed the entire construct of the hotel and all the nearby machines. The video feed for the safe zone was cut off, and the image vanished. Everyone was shocked. When they noticed what had just happened, their faces turned grave. They hoped Han Sen was able to deflect that last attack. Otherwise, they'd be next. As their hearts almost leaped out of their chests, they heard a big boom. After it, the entire safe zone began to shake. Boom! Outside the hotel, before Tina's strike impacted Han Sen, a dark purple arm shield appeared upon his arm. The shield swiftly became 3 meters tall, sheltering Han Senator. Tina's attack came down against it. When the hit landed, the word overbearing appeared upon the shield. Han Sen was sent flying backwards into the hotel, breaking down a number of walls as he went. When he landed, he skidded across the ground for a few hundred meters. But Han Sen was still on his feet. His mouth was bleeding, but he still held the shield. The arm shield had a number of cracks across it, but the word overbearing was now shining like a sun. At the same time, Tina screamed. The power she had unleashed was turned back on her by the shield. Tina felt a wretched strength come down upon her, and the armor that previously encased her began to fall. Her lips were bleeding. Tina didn't own that armor set, and what's more, she couldn't control it fully. Now that the power she had unleashed was turned back onto it, it disconnected the armor, and various pieces of the armor began to fall away from her. Han Sen, Tina, and Shei-Fi were all shocked. They did not expect Tina to end up being shaken out of the armor she wore. Han Sen could feel that the armor was too strong. The power he had ricocheted back was awful, but it wasn't enough to actually destroy the armor itself. Now Tina had been bounced out of the armor. It was quite surprising. Is Tina the same as me? Can she not control the armor properly, either? So, when the power bounced back on the armor, she was disconnected from it. Han Sen was thinking, heading over towards the crystal armor. If Tina was unable to control the armor, Han Sen only needed to go and steal it. Even if he was unable to use it, asset denial was always a good idea. If she didn't have the armor, Han Sen would surely be able to beat her. Tina's face changed. Then, she headed directly for the crystal armor at the same time. Just as Han Sen thought, Tina was unable to properly control the armor. The Geno armor belonged to the chairman. He had taught Tina a method in which she could make use of the armor's power, a method that only worked for her. It didn't have any negative side effects either. But that was because Tina had the chairman's genes, which allowed her to temporarily use the power of the armor. Only Tina could do this, and not even Shei-Fi could prompt a reaction from the armor if she tried to use it. The chairman taught this method to Tina in front of everyone. But despite everyone hearing what she was taught, only Tina was able to make use of the Geno armor. Shei-Fi and the others believed the armor contained the power of a god. Only gods like the chairman and Tina could make use of it. Han Sen and Tina rushed towards the armor with a similar speed. Unfortunately, Tina was closer to the armor. Han Sen used Taya, and he began swinging it at Tina. In a flash, she deflected it with a swing of her own sword. With the room that Strike had bought him, Han Sen rushed to the armor to claim it. Han Sen grabbed it, but he immediately noticed how heavy it was. He was unable to lift the armor up, and he found himself falling down with it. Tina, who had just been slowed down by Han Sen, laughed when she saw him. This is God's armor, and mortals like you are incapable of staining it with your filth. Han Sen didn't want to let go, so he allowed himself to fall to the ground with the armor. A crater formed in the earth, kicking up a plume of dust. Han Sen gritted his teeth, summoning his real blood Geno core. He wanted to see if he'd be able to control the armor that way. But when real blood touched the armor, it was like water dropping atop anti-stick paper. It just rolled off and was unable to gain a connection with the armor. Tina, holding her greatsword, came forward again. Han Sen would not be able to guard the armor and do battle with Tina at the same time. And he knew that if she managed to reclaim the armor, getting her out would be harder the next time. Han Sen used his shield to block Tina's greatsword. He used his sword to force her back and prohibit her from getting any closer to the armor. Guarding it is pointless. God's armor doesn't belong to you, mortal. Tina looked at Han Sen with disdain as she continued attacking. Shei-Fi was looking on in shock. After she damaged Idongmu, she didn't go to finish him off. She ran to Han Sen, wanting to help Tina reclaim the armor. Idongmu was too low level to be of much assistance, and he had been severely injured. He wanted to stop Shei-Fi, but he was unable to keep up with her. All he could was watch her glide away. Han Sen had his gold-patterned shield and his god Geno core. It would not be too difficult to kill Tina, but with Shei-Fi joining the fray, Han Sen would be the one in trouble. With the gold-patterned shield, Han Sen wasn't afraid of losing against the two, but the armor wasn't moving. He couldn't let Tina get any closer, and this prohibited him from fighting in the manner he wished to. The gold-patterned shield was a berserk super beast soul, but after that horrible hit it had endured, there was a large crack across its surface. Still, as things were, Tina and Shei-Fi were unable to penetrate his defense. And what's more, he was able to keep on reversing the damage that they tried to inflict back on them. But soon, Shei-Fi and Tina began attacking from both sides, which made it difficult for Han Sen to keep up the pace. He had to focus on blocking Tina first and foremost, to prevent her from getting her hands on the armor. As his body was peppered with damage from Shei-Fi, he began to bleed. Pang! Han Sen took a bad punch from Shei-Fi, and his body touched down on the crystal armor. Tina was on the side of the armor, just about ready to grab it. It was too late for Han Sen to stop her, so his plan next was to get up, grab Han Yin, and run. But before he could do any of that, he felt the story of genes flare up. So far, it had only shown minute activity, and the reactions it had were nothing that would aid in a fight. Now it was starting to run properly, though, and Han Sen had no idea why. The moment the story of genes began to run, Han Sen felt as if his body and the crystal armor inside his body had some sort of reaction. In the next second, the crystal armor on the ground began to shine brightly. Han Sen's body felt as if it was in water. He fell into the cream-colored crystal armor.
Impossible.
How? Shei-Fi and Tina almost screamed. Their eyes shot open wide, as if they had just seen a ghost. They couldn't believe Han Sen was able to activate the armor. No way. Father said other beings of the universe were incapable of activating the armor for themselves. Only people like us, who share the blood of a god, are able to. Tina grabbed the crystal armor, wanting to use the method the chairman had taught her to get Han Sen out. But when Tina touched the armor, she felt a force that made her scream and bounce away. F***CK. What happened? Tina tried clenching her numbed hands as she looked on at the armor with a face of disbelief. Shei-Fi was shocked too. Han Sen had activated the Geno armor and replaced Tina as its user. What happened? This is the chairman's Geno armor. Only people with the blood of a god can use it. How was he able to activate it? Does he have a higher permission of some kind? Shei-Fi struggled to think of how this was possible, and she was getting frantically worried. Han Sen was inside the armor, which fit his body perfectly. As the story of genes continued to run, he felt the scary power of the armor going inside him. He wanted to scream, and the strength that entered him felt as if it could destroy the universe with only a punch. It's so powerful. Is this the power of the crystal armor? Han Sen tried to move around with the god's armor, but after moving only a little, he felt the fabric of space crack. The power it contained was incredible. Han Sen clenched his fist and felt a power surge there. He thought to himself, the story of Gene's power is to control the crystal armor? With power like this, not even super demigod creatures are a force to be reckoned with. This was very worth it. Even if it took me a full 10 years to procure this, it was still worth it. Han Sen looked over to Shei-Fi and Tina. He clenched his fist and launched it directly at Tina. Be careful, miss. Shei-Fi shouted, pushing her away. Tina had frozen solid. Boom! Shei-Fi took that frightening blow, and her fourth-ranked fighter's body was immediately incinerated into dust. The strength did not stop there, however. It flew upwards into the sky and blasted a hole in the atmosphere. The rift formed was held open by a beam, and it began to expand. Strong. So strong. Han Sen did not have any other words to describe the power he had witnessed. He felt as if it would only take a punch to destroy Fantas in its entirety. No way. Father said, aside from him, across the whole universe, only I was able to make use of this Geno armor. You required the blood of a god to use it, after all. But Han Sen is just a human. How is he able to use it? This had impacted Tina a lot, and she couldn't believe another human was able to use the Geno armor. Not only that, but Han Sen was using more power than she could when she wore it. While the story of genes was running, Han Sen felt as if he was melting into the armor. They were not separate, and the power was running all throughout his body and armor. It was as if the armor was a part of him. Han Sen's body was filled with power. He looked at Tina, whose face had now become drawn and pale. He clenched his fist and drove it right at her. She didn't want to try to fight against a power that could break a planet. She didn't run, though. She just remained transfixed at the sight of that horrendous power coming right for her. Just as that power was about to turn her into dust, an elegant middle-aged man appeared next to her. His hand pressed against her shoulder, and in a second, the middle-aged man and Tina vanished. The scary power was exhausted into space. Han Sen used his Dongxian aura to search the vicinity, but Tina and the middle-aged man appeared to no longer be on planet Fantas. In another quadrant of the galaxy, Tina and the middle-aged man appeared again. Tina was still shocked at what had just happened, but she was happy to see the middle-aged man. Uncle Qingyu, why are you here? The middle-aged man smiled and said, If I wasn't watching over you, you'd have been killed. Tina was still frightened over what had transpired, and she said, "That human is too scary. I thought Father said only those of our blood can use that Geno armor. Why was the human able to use it too, and exude an even stronger power with it?" Uncle Qingyu flicked her on the head with his finger. "Ouch," she said, reeling back. "Uncle Qingyu, why did you hit me?" "You deserve that," Uncle Qingyu said. "You snuck out of here, stealing the chairman's armor in the process. Now, that armor is gone. It was taken. How are you going to explain this?" Tina looked upset. She tugged at his arm and pleaded, "Uncle Qingyu, you will have to say something nice to my father. If you don't, I'm sure I'll be dead." The man sighed. "I will do what I can, but you will have to fess up to your mistakes. Otherwise, no one can help you." He then touched her shoulder again, and they both disappeared. When they appeared again, they were in an airship outside the galaxy. Planet Phantus was like an apocalyptic hellscape. Idongmu got a grip on his pain and stood up, looking at Han Sen with a conflicted expression. He thought Han Sen had been in the Barrens for 10 years, so he'd had the chance to catch up. But there was still a big difference between the two of them. The gulf that separated their powers seemed to be ocean-wide. Han Sen forced the armor into his sea of soul. While he was using the story of genes, the crystal armor had become a part of Han's senator now. He could make use of it whenever he liked. But when he stopped running it, that feeling would be gone. He would no longer feel a connection to the armor. Big Brother, Han Yin, and everyone else emerged from the ruins of the hotel. Seeing Han Sen standing tall, she was shocked, and she immediately began running toward him. Her face was wreathed with dried tear tracks, indicating that she had only just been crying. "Where are those two horrible women?" Hong Lianshuan looked afraid, unable to see hide nor hair of Shaifai or Tina anymore. After the signal got cut off, they had no clue what was occurring on the outside. When they exited the safe zone, all they knew was that Shaifai and Tina were gone. The Shura woman is dead, but the other one ran off. It is safe now.
Han Sen smiled.
Zhao Mingze and the others were shocked to hear this. It made sense that Shaifai had been killed, but before the signal got cut off, they saw Tina's power. It wasn't something a human could defend against. They couldn't imagine how strong Han Sen must have been to be able to block the woman's attack and make her run off. The mere fact that they had survived was cause enough for merriment. They didn't have the mental energy to think about an alternate ending, right then? They waited there for over an hour, and after that, the ships of the Alliance and the Zhao family began arriving at Planet Phantus. They explained what had occurred. Han Sen asked Yi Dongmu to cover for him about what had actually happened. But even so, the soldiers of the Alliance were in absolute shock. Seeing all the sword marks that had swept across Planet Phantus, they knew how terrifying the battle must have been. Han Sen and Yi Dongmu had managed to beat back the enemy. When the day was done, the soldiers were looking at them both in profound admiration. Zhao Mingze quietly retrieved the video in the safe zone, though. He kept it private, and he sent it to Zhao 7th when he was able to. Zhao 7th watched the tape and replayed it a few more times before speaking. He said, "Find out who that woman is and find out what her armor is as well. Father, do we still need to investigate Han Sen?" Zhao Mingze couldn't help but ask. Zhao 7th said coldly, "No. If he can beat a woman like this, it's proof enough that he is abnormal. This exceeds all our expectations. He is stronger than us. It is pointless for us to continue investigating him. You make sure to look into the woman in the meantime. Find out who she is, but don't draw attention or invoke the ire of any potential new enemies." "Yes, I will get right on it." Zhao Mingze was a demigod, and Zhao 7th was still only a surpasser. But even so, before Zhao 7th, Zhao Mingze felt like a child who did not know too much. After Zhao Mingze left, Zhao 7th began speaking to himself. "It looks like our research has developed too slowly. To think that such strength exists in our world. It far exceeds the capabilities of the average demigod. We have to quickly produce a greater angel gene fluid." Because of what had happened on Planet Phantus, Han Sen returned to the Alliance's spotlight for the first time in 10 years. Everyone was talking about how powerful he had become, but no one was really able to guess correctly. Based on the state of the planet and the things people said, it was determined that Han Sen had reached superclass. But he hadn't entered the sanctuary for 10 years, and he hadn't been there for very long before his disappearance. The fact that he had been able to reach a super demigod status in such a short amount of time was incredibly difficult to believe. Han Sen didn't care about what others thought of him, though. To keep the new community from trying something again, he asked his family to avoid going out or to stay inside the sanctuaries. Ji Yanran and Little Flower were safe in the Ji house. The Ji family's planet had countless airships and defensive systems. It was not like Planet Phantus, but Han Sen was still worried about Ji Yanran and Little Flower. They could be targets, and there were too many elites in the new community. It would be difficult to defend against such numbers. And the man who took Tina could obviously teleport freely through space. He had to be someone of some renown. It couldn't have been some random nobody. Somehow, Han Sen thought the man looked familiar. Despite that, he was certain he hadn't seen the man before. Nothing happened after the battle on Phantus. Unexpectedly, it was as if the new community forgot the entire thing transpired. Entering the sanctuary again, Han Sen realized he was unable to use the crystal armor. Even if he wore the crystal armor on his way in, when he appeared inside the sanctuary, the connection he felt with it would be severed and its power could not be maintained. The crystal armor is so powerful, but it seems suppressed by the sanctuary. What exactly are the sanctuaries? Han Sen wondered. Han Sen gave up on his idea of slaying everything in sight with the new armor. He needed to level up, but he'd have to do it through the use of his own hard-earned powers. 4 of his Geno cores had reached silver, and aside from the crystal core, none of the others had run the silver Geno core test. Crystal core had reached first rank, but he had been gone for 10 years and had been unable to accept challenges. Because of this, it had dropped down into the 10,000s. Han Sen planned on leveling up his Geno cores, and when he reinforced them all 9 times again, he'd be able to use the gold Geno core light to bring them up to gold class. But before he could go to the Geno core storage, Ling Mayer came looking for him. She said she was supposed to leave Dark Spirit Shelter a few days earlier, but she had remained there, waiting on Han Sen or so. When he finally did come back, she was still there waiting for him. Han Sen followed Ling Mayer back to Mask Shelter. Little Uncle followed after them, too. I'm concerned this trip might not be so safe, Han Sen thought to himself, after leaving Dark Spirit Shelter. Spirit 13 must have concocted some sort of scheme once he had gotten Little Uncle to go with them. The confusing thing was that the Black and White Snake King was always with Ling Mayer. It could not be swayed, so it was very unlikely Spirit 13 could accomplish anything. What was the spirit really trying to do? Suddenly, something crossed Han Sen's mind. What if I'm the one he now wants to get? Han Sen thought it was possible. Spirit 13 doesn't want to kill Ling Mayer. He needs her to improve his genes. Those he actually wants to kill must be those who are stopping him. That must be why he sent Little Uncle. It's to kill me. Thinking of that, Han Sen actually felt relief. He had the God Geno core, and even if Spirit 13 had super creatures, there was very little he could do now. The 3 of them followed the Snake King back to Mask Shelter, and along the way, they encountered a variety of ants sticking out of a number of caves as they went. They weren't ordinary ants. They were red, as if they were on fire, and around the size of a puppy. Weird. Why are there so many bloodthirsty ants? Ling Mayer frowned, seeing the ants gathered in unusual numbers. I was right. Han Sen smiled darkly. He didn't know how Spirit 13 had attracted all of those ants, but he just knew the spirit had to be responsible. Han Sen asked Ling Mayer about the bloodthirsty ants, and he was surprised by what he heard. Bloodthirsty ants were mostly primitive in class, but there were so many of them. You could often see mutant or sacred blood ones in their midst. There were king ants, too, and they could often be super creatures. The Geno core of a bloodthirsty ant was its blood. When the ants entered bloodthirsty mode, their speed and power would increase. The defense of their shells would also increase. They were annoying. However, there was one thing Han Sen was happy to learn. Their beast souls were glyph type. They could buff his body up. Their Geno cores were difficult to retrieve, though. When you destroyed the ants, their blood would suffer and their Geno cores would most likely break. Spirit 13 is playing big. With Little Uncle here, the Ant King will most certainly come out to play. Han Sen was fearless, and he was actually feeling excited for this. Maybe if I'm lucky, I can nab another super beast soul. The group continued on their way as more and more of the bloodthirsty ants became visible. In the beginning, the ants only waited and watched them go by, but now, the creatures were starting to swing their claws. Han Sen killed a few that ventured close, but they were only primitive. He didn't get a single beast soul or geno core. But the blood of the murdered ants triggered the fury of the others. An army of ants came cascading out of their holes and caves towards the group. Their eyes glistened red like hellish demons. In no time at all, the three of them found themselves surrounded by the ants. Aside from Little Uncle, who was a little weaker than them, Han Sen and Ling Meier were gemstone class. And while the ants were powerful, they didn't pose much of a threat. The more ants they killed, the more arrived to take their places. Their swarming numbers seemed endless. In the beginning, they only encountered ants that were primitive class. As time went by, more and more mutants and sacred bloods began to join the fray. Let's run. There are too many of them, and we won't be able to kill them all. I'll run out of juice really quickly. Ling Meier continued to kill the ants as she spoke. It's okay. Carry on fighting. Han Sen wasn't planning on leaving just yet. Han Sen knew there'd be no point in moving on. With Little Uncle accompanying them, the ants were sure to follow. As they spoke, a red ant that was the size of a bull emerged from a nearby tunnel. Oh no, it's a bloodthirsty ant king. Ling Meier saw the giant ant, and when she did, her face changed. The Snake King had been moving ahead of them, and when it saw the giant ant, it turned around, picked up Ling Meier, and went speeding off to mask shelter. It didn't care about Han Sen or Wang Yuhang at all. *T. What's up with that snake? Why'd it run off and abandon us like that? Wang Yuhang shouted. In a cave far away, Spirit 13 and Spirit 12 watched as Han Sen and Wang Yuhang became besieged by the tide of ants. Spirit 13 said, "It is a shame Dollar is not here. Otherwise, we could kill him too. Don't worry. There are so many around her we need to kill, and we will. There is that female spirit as well," Spirit 12 said coldly. Han Sen, seeing the Ant King, became incredibly happy. He picked up Wang Yuhang and tucked him beneath his armpit. Then, he hopscotched across the backs of the ants to reach a certain cave. Little Uncle, say something to attract them, Han Sen said to Wang Yuhang as he ran. Wang Yuhang didn't know what Han Sen wanted, but he still listened to him. He shouted at the ants, drawing them forward. "You rubbish ants, come and get me." When Wang Yuhang yelled, all the bloodthirsty ants stopped in their place. They looked over to Wang Yuhang with their red eyes. In the next second, the raging ants, King included, went on a rampage in Wang Yuhang's direction.
Han Sen, run.
Wang Yuhang began shouting, "I am running," Han Sen said without looking back. Spirit 13 and Spirit 12, seeing the stampeding ants, suddenly found themselves frightened. Little Uncle's powers were more effective than they had expected. "He has a death wish," Spirit 13 said. He didn't think Han Sen and Wang Yuhang could handle the rampaging ants. But quickly, their faces changed. Han Sen had grabbed Wang Yuhang and run. The crowds of ants, like a dirty tide, could not catch up to them. Spirit 13 and Spirit 12 shifted forward so they could see, but then noticed something was wrong. Spirit 12 reacted first, and he said, "No, they are heading for our shelter. They won't be able to reach it, will they?" Spirit 13 looked nervous. "There's something wrong with this human. The Ant King is unable to catch up with him. Let us return to the shelter. We can't let them in." Spirit 12 looked ill. He wanted to stop what he had put into motion, but he couldn't keep up with Han Sen. They realized it was too late. They were too slow, and they were already some distance away from Han Senator. It would be impossible for them to reach their destination before the human. They must be randomly running in a direction, yes? They cannot be deliberately heading for our shelter, surely. Spirit 13 tried to comfort himself.
**men.
This human had it all planned. Spirit 12 was not as naive as Spirit 13 was. His face looked terrible, and he continued the pursuit. Han Sen, still holding on to Wang Yuhang, kept running. Wang Yuhang could see that the legions of ants were unable to catch up, and even the Ant King had been left behind. He was excited by this, and it prompted him to taunt, "You uglies! You should be thankful God let you hideous things live. It's fine if you don't want to contribute, but now you're going out of your way to kill Uncle Wong. You filthy things are animals. God will flame grill you into barbecue ants, and I'll be munching your roasted corpses as I sip wine." If nasty looks could kill, the fierce eyes of the ants would have murdered Wang Yuhang many times over by now. Those eyes were bright like lanterns, flashing red as the ants skittered along with incredible speed. This was especially true of the Ant King. You'd think Wang Yuhang had personally murdered its family. It flew through the air and landed directly behind Han Sen, ready to attack Wang Yuhang. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." Wang Yuhang screamed, wriggling and writhing with his hands and legs. Han Sen summoned his God Geno Core to dodge the Ant King. Han Sen didn't know Wang Yuhang was that attractive to creatures. It was as if the man's taunts worked like stimulant injectors, providing a surge of adrenaline to those that hounded him. Han Sen hadn't planned on using his God Geno Core, but he now realized he had to. The Ant King's claws flew towards Wang Yuhang's face, seeking to strike his eyes out of their sockets. But when Han Sen sped up again, the Ant King was left behind once more. Wang Yuhang took this as another opportunity to provoke the insects. "Little ants, you want to touch this pretty face? For a man like me, my face is my fate. Even if you sold all your property, it wouldn't be enough to cover a single one of my trips to the local makeup store." Han Sen kept running as Wang Yuhang did his best to provoke the ants. The ant army was fuming with rage, determined not to let them go. Spirit 13 and Spirit 12 looked both angry and hopeless. They couldn't catch up with the ants, and the ants were getting closer and closer to their shelter. Without a doubt, Han Sen was intending to attract the ants to the shelter. Seeing the raging hordes, they couldn't imagine the horrors that might unfold when they reached there. "Father, make them stop or our shelter will be no more." Spirit 13 screamed. "This is the only way." Spirit 12 gritted his teeth and summoned a few eggs that looked like ping-pong balls. He scattered them on the ground with clear unwillingness. The juice spread everywhere, and he said, "I am going to make them pay." Spirit 12 had used blood snake eggs. They were the babies of gemstone sacred blood creatures. The taste could most certainly attract the ants. He used one to attract the ants to come for Han Sen in the first place. Otherwise, little uncle wouldn't have been able to attract the creatures from such a great distance. But blood snakes were very precious, and Spirit 12 hated that he had to use more. But after he threw them, the ants had no reaction to them. They were still chasing after Han Sen. What happened? Why didn't the eggs work? Spirit 13's face changed. Oh no, they made the ants angry. The egg smell alone won't attract them. Spirit 12 ground his teeth harder, and then he lobbed out the remainder of his eggs at the horde of ants. He couldn't afford to be stingy at this point, so he threw them all. The blood snake eggs hit their shells, splashing juices all over the place. Spirit 12 thought this would get the attention of the ants for sure, but he never would have expected the ants to completely ignore them. Even the ants that had egg juice on them did not care. They were still focused on chasing down Wang Yuhang.
No.
No. Spirit 12 and Spirit 13 screamed hopelessly. The bunch of crazy ants after Han Sen and Wang Yuhang were now already at the shelter. Han Sen arrived at the entrance and flew up top. Then, the Ant King came forward to batter the gate. Boom! The Ant King's body broke down the gate, tossing it aside. Countless ants then swarmed inside. Oh no! Spirit 12 and Spirit 13 felt a chill. Han Sen led the army of ants into the shelter, and the red-eyed ants skittered everywhere once inside. They couldn't catch Han Sen, so they merely dined on whatever other creatures happened to be in their way. Even the buildings and constructs were broken in their rampage. The ants were like an overflowing river, swamping the entire shelter. In moments, the ground was like a blood-red sea. "I am going to kill you." Spirit 12 saw the creatures in his shelter getting eaten by the ants. They had been difficult to tame, and he clenched his jaw harder and harder. Spirit 13 kept a hand on Spirit 12, prohibiting him from rushing in to attack Han Sen. The raging ants were everywhere, and the Ant King was there, as well. It was too dangerous to go. Spirit 13 was glad that their dark spirit stones were in dark spirit shelter. That much was certain. They would probably have been killed, with all the ants that had now taken over their shelter. Han Sen raced into the spirit hall and grabbed the spirit stone embedded in the statue. But the spirit stone did not belong to Spirit 13, and he found that it simply belonged to a royal spirit. This disappointed him. The royal spirit wasn't willing to pledge allegiance to Han Sen, and it self-destructed. Han Sen thought the spirit might have had a connection to Spirit 12. The shelter, by this point, had been turned upside down. Han Sen led the crowd of ants outside, leaving behind a shelter that was now little more than rubble. "I'm going to kill you." Han Sen heard someone shouting from behind. Han Sen cared little for the voice, though, and he just continued running with the ants. "Han Sen, what do we do? The ants won't stop chasing us." Wang Yuhang sounded worried. "We'll kill the Ant King and everything will work out," Han Sen said, as he continued running. "How? Are you able to kill it?" "It looks like a super demigod to me," Wang Yuhang said. "Well, we can give it a try," Han Sen said, then drilled into another passageway. The passageway was only one person tall, and when Han Sen went in, the Ant King followed. It broke many rocks to get through. Han Sen saw this as his opportunity. He was going to combine Taya with the red light from his God Geno core. Swiftly, he stepped towards the ant's eyes. The Ant King's eyes were suddenly turned into gaping holes. The creature was instantly stunned with pain, and it reeled back with a sudden desire to flee the cave. "Little uncle, draw it back over here. Don't let it run off," Han Sen quickly called. "I'm not attracting that thing," Wang Yuhang shouted, but ultimately he couldn't help himself. He yelled at the Ant King, "Dumb ant! I thought you wanted me. Come and get me." The Ant King had wanted to fall back, but it abandoned that desire when it heard Wang Yuhang's voice. With a murderous look, the Ant King tried to rush back in. It kept digging its way through in a bid to reach Wang Yuhang and kill him. "Good job, little uncle. Continue seducing it," Han Sen said, stepping back deeper into the cave. "Could you use a different F***king word?" Wang Yuhang shouted as he continued attracting the Ant King. Han Sen kept running too, but said, "You prefer luring? But that's not quite right. You really are more like a pimp. **T. You are not educated. This is called sacrifice," Wang Yuhang said, biting his lips. "Yeah, sure. Sacrifice." Han Sen just nodded. Wang Yuhang sounded mad, and he retorted, "Just stop talking crap, you idiot." Han Sen stopped talking and spent more effort on running. Han Sen kept thrusting Taya into the Ant King that was nipping at his heels. The Ant King's fitness wasn't bad, and while Han Sen could damage the fiend, he found himself unable to kill it. Every time the Ant King was injured, it wanted to catch them even more. Wang Yuhang's presence maintained its aggro. Its steel-like body pursued them, and Han Sen stabbed it in the head many times. It continued to bleed profusely, and after an hour, it began to look weak. It took half a day for Han Sen to finally plunge his weapon through the Ant King's head. The Ant King crumpled to the ground and twitched for a while before it stopped moving. The Ant King's face was full of holes, showing how many times Han Sen had stabbed it. It looked really bad. Super creature bloodthirsty Ant King killed. Beast soul gained. Geno core unobtained. Flesh inedible. Consume the life Geno essence to gain 0 to 10 super Geno points. When Han Sen heard the kill announcement, he felt as satisfied as he did when he ate a life fruit. Hunting creatures is better. Those Geno plant fruits are useless. Han Sen had a higher chance of obtaining a beast soul by killing creatures, and now that he had gotten another super beast soul, he was incredibly happy. Then Han Sen felt angry again when his mind returned to opening Geno fruit. The Ant King's body began to fade away, leaving behind a crystal that was the shape of a mini Ant King. Han Sen picked it up. The crowd of ants, seeing the dead Ant King, dispersed and ran off. They all gave up their pursuit. Wang Yuhang wished to shout, but Han Sen held his mouth shut and said, "Don't. There are too many of them. God knows how long it might take us to kill them." Getting the Ant King was enough. Yes, but by killing the Ant King, only you were able to get a life Geno essence. I didn't get anything. Kill some sacred blood ants for me. Wang Yuhang thought it had been unfair. There are loads of opportunities to kill sacred blood creatures, so there's no reason for us to attract so many ants at once. And as for this life geno essence, half of it can be yours. If you want, I can give it to you. Han Sen then put down the life geno essence delicately. Han Sen had other life geno essences, but he had thus far been unable to absorb them. If Wang Yuhang was able to figure out a way in which it might be absorbed, there would be no harm. Since Han Sen was able to kill super creatures now, he didn't mind giving up one life geno essence. He had also managed to get the beast soul, after all. Really? Wang Yuhang looked at him in disbelief. To him, Han Sen had never been that generous. What do you mean by that? Just take it. Han Sen threw the life geno essence at Wang Yuhang. Wang Yuhang was delighted. He held the life geno essence like a son and said, "Yee, thank you so much. Next time we kill a super creature, the life geno essence will be yours." Han Sen wished to say something, but suddenly, a strange sound was heard. When he turned around, his face changed. They had been too busy killing the Ant King, and they hadn't paid attention to what else was going on. They heard a noise, and they finally noticed a dome-like cave ahead of them, and an old tree inside it. The old tree possessed a lot of fruit, but they were certainly abnormal. They looked like bees, and they were around the same size as a man's fist. The wings of the bee fruit were continuously flapping, generating the typical buzzing noise bees produced. They looked weird enough to make anyone feel itchy, seeing so many bees swarmed around the tree. Han Sen didn't know what sort of tree it was, but after using his Dongxian aura, he could tell it was immensely powerful. Fortunately, the bees were just fruit. They were still attached to their harboring branches, so they couldn't attack. While Han Sen and Wang Yuhang still marveling at their current luck, another noise suddenly sounded. One of the bee fruits twirled around and tried to strike Wang Yuhang by firing its stinger. The stinger was too fast, and Wang Yuhang failed to dodge it in time. Fortunately, Han Sen was quick enough to react and smack the projectile down onto the ground. But even after that, Han Sen's hand began to feel incredibly numb. His face changed. Wang Yuhang felt much relief, but now all the bees on the tree had propped their stingers up to take aim at him. Like rain, the stingers all fired needles at Wang Yuhang. "Oh no!" Wang Yuhang shouted. He was unable to dodge a single one, and now that they were all firing his way, he pictured himself ending up very swollen. No matter how fast Han Sen could swing his sword, he wouldn't be able to take down all the toxic needles either. He summoned his overbearing shield to cover both of them. Many toxic stingers struck the overbearing shield, battering it with the patter of a rainstorm. They were unable to break the defense, though. The gold word overbearing then began to glow atop the shield, ricocheting the force of the stingers back at the tree they had been fired from. Han Sen thought firing back might allow them to damage the bee fruit, or perhaps even kill a few, giving Han Sen a chance to discover what they were. When the toxic stingers were pinged back, at about halfway in their return flight, it was suddenly as if they possessed minds of their own. They turned around in midair and came back for Han Sen. But the toxic stingers didn't come straight for them this time. Their flight path curved to go around the shield and get Han Sen and Wang Yuhang. They were like small daggers. The overbearing shield was strong, but it could only protect one side. It could not protect against stingers that came from a variety of directions. This turn of events wasn't making Han Sen happy, so he picked up Wang Yuhang and decided to run. Fortunately, the toxic stingers couldn't fly very far. When Han Sen had run the distance of a mile, the stingers flew back and returned to the tails of the bee fruit. What are those things? They can reattach their stingers? Han Sen looked back at the bee tree, seeming surprised. A whole tree full of bees. That's disgusting. Let's run, Wang Yuhang said. Stop. The old tree might be decent. The toxic stingers are quite strong and likely super in class, but perhaps the bee fruits are super creatures. If we kill them, that is a lot of life geno essences for us to harvest. And we're sure to get a beast soul with those odds, Han Sen said. No way. How can one tree possess so many super creatures? Are they that cheap now? Wang Yuhang struggled to believe him. It's worth giving it a shot. What if I'm right? Han Sen didn't want to leave, but he hadn't yet thought of a way in which he might kill the bee fruit. Their toxic stingers were too small, and they had a distant operational range. Furthermore, The overbearing shield would be incapable of blocking them all. Han Sen didn't want to risk getting stung, so he paced back and forth for a while thinking. He still couldn't come up with a firm solution. If those bees are all super creatures, this'll be hard. Perhaps we should go back and make a plan? Wang Yuheng seemed to be afraid of bees. Han Sen looked around and noticed there was only one path leading to the tree. If Han Sen had to retreat, it'd be difficult to make use of the exact same path again. Fine, let's go back. We'll return when we come up with a solution. Han Sen then took Wang Yuheng back to Mask Shelter. Ling Meier, seeing them both return safely, was very happy. She thought Han Sen and Wang Yuheng might have been unable to survive the wrath of the Ant King. When Han Sen retired to his room, he had the time to inspect the bloodthirsty ant beast soul. Super Beast Soul Bloodthirsty Ant King. Glyph type. Han Sen already knew about the Ant King's beast soul type, so he summoned it out. The tattoo of a red ant king appeared on his body, and when it did, a strange heat surged into him. With this intense warmth, it soon began to feel as if his blood was boiling. His strength and speed had definitely increased. Han Sen, feeling this power inside him, was quite pleased. When Han Sen used the God Geno core, his power reached that of a super demigod. But that was only because he used the red light from the God Geno core and the abilities granted by the butterfly wings. Han Sen's strength was still stuck at the tier of a gemstone-class creature, but the Ant King glyph increased his power and speed. Now he really was very close to super. Not bad. This is actually pretty nice. I suppose it was worth my time and effort. Han Sen was really fond of the Ant King's beast soul. The Ant King was strong, but it didn't help him with a plan for killing the old bee tree. He couldn't just run up to the tree and kill all the bees. It'd be great if I had a super armor. If I did, I could totally block the stingers and kill the bees. It's a shame that pet armor can only be used on a pet. Unfortunately, I don't have any strong pets. If Meowth went up to the old tree, it's unlikely it'd be able to damage the old tree fruit. I need to find a super pet, Han Sen thought to himself. It was a shame Han Sen had been unable to get one of those so far. Unless Little Angel evolved, his super pet armor would be useless. Little Angel, come out soon. Han Sen missed the time he had spent with Little Angel in the past. Dad, I miss Little Flower. Shouldn't we go and visit Little Brother?
Bau asket.
Okay, let's go and find Little Flower. Han Sen took Bauer to a teleporter to leave. Han Sen was living with the G family, currently. When Han Sen came out on the other side of the teleporter, he raised his head. Someone was coming his way. When Han Sen saw the person, he realized it was Ji Qing. Ji Qing was the most talented young person in the Ji family. When she was in the first God's Sanctuary, she managed to kill a super creature. She had gone on to max out her super Geno points, and she possessed a Sword Soul super body. The Ji family spent a lot on making her this strong. She had worked hard, and she had already become a surpasser. She had almost maxed out her super Geno points there, as well. She was going to become a demigod in the very near future. Han Sen heard Ji Qing's Sword Soul super body was very strong, but he had never seen it in action. They didn't maintain contact much, if at all. In fact, they'd only encountered each other at a few important events, and even then, their exchanges had been brief. Brother-in-law, your sword skills are good. I have almost become a demigod. I would like to fight against you and see which of us is better with the blade.
Ji King, Sening Han Sen, Smiled.
You have a sword-based super body. There is no chance of me beating you. Han Sen was past the age of wanting to win for bragging rights. There were no benefits to fighting Ji Qing, and if he ended up hurting her feelings, it'd only invite the complaints of other members of the Ji family. Ji Qing blinked and said, well, that is something we'll have to find out when we fight. When I become a demigod, I'll have to fight against you for real. We can cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I have duties I must attend to. And what's more, your sister is waiting for me at home. I'm going to leave now, Han Sen said that so he could get away. After taking Bauer with him, Han Sen thought to himself, I want to stay in the sanctuary. If I'm there, there's no way she could seek me out. And besides, she won't be able to fight me unless she spawns right beside me when she ascends. The sanctuary is so big, the chance of her ending up near me is minuscule. Back with the G family, Ji and Ran was sunbathing in the garden alongside Little Flower. Zero was also there, drinking tea. Bauer jumped down near Little Flower, stroked his face, and said, "Did you miss your big sister?" "Big sis?" was what Little Flower could manage to speak. That being said, he was only comfortable saying mom, dad, sister, granddad, and grandma. Still, that was very good. "Anything new happened recently?" Han Sen asked as he sat down. He poured himself a cup of tea. Ji and Ran knew he was referring to the new community, so she shook her head and replied, "Nothing. It's as if they've forgotten all of that took place." Han Sen frowned. "No way. I stole their treasure. There's no way they'd sit back and do absolutely nothing. Their tempers cannot be that composed." In truth, it wasn't about their tempers. They just hadn't been able to figure out how Han Sen had been able to make use of the Geno armor. If Han Sen was able to use it, they didn't think it'd be worth taking him on when he could use it against them. That was why they had decided to do nothing in retaliation. In the new community, there was only the one Geno armor. Unless the leader himself went to fight, no one there could beat Han Sen. The body of the new community's chairman had yet to fully recover, and it was due to this mixture of reasons they hadn't formulated a plan to exact revenge on Han Sen. Tina was punished for her actions. Even though it was a grand mistake she had made, the punishment she received wasn't very harsh. The chairman was obviously fond of her. If Han Sen had killed Tina, things might not have ended up as they had. The chairman might have revealed himself to Han Sen so they could fight, no matter what. After resting for 2 days, Han Sen returned to the sanctuary. Then, he went to visit the Geno core storage. He wanted to level up his Geno cores. Han Sen used his crystal core as a key to open the Geno core storage this time, as his crystal core's ranking was low. It was weak, and he knew he had to get it to first place. Over the course of 10 years, people had forgotten all about crystal core. So, Han Sen went on to challenge the Geno cores ahead of him. His challenges were accepted. Han Sen managed to get under the 10,000 bracket, and he eventually went sub 1,000. After that, Han Sen had to challenge those in the hundreds all the way to the tens, and from there, 10 and below. But when a Geno core in the 1,000 and below bracket challenged those that were below 100, it wasn't easy. The Geno cores there would not accept a challenge very easily, as they were afraid of dropping a rank. Han Sen sent a number of challenge requests, but none gave him a reply. If this goes on, when will I ever reach first place? Han Sen was used to getting number 1 as soon as he entered. He wasn't fond of, or used to, working his way through the ranks, step by step. There was nothing else he could do for the time being, at least. Han Sen looked at the silver Geno core leaderboard, and whenever a name lit up, he'd send an invite and wait for a potential opponent to accept. But none of his challenge requests worked, despite repeated sending. As Han Sen increased his pace to full-on invitation spam, the leaderboard lit up and sucked Han Sen in through a portal. Someone accepted my challenge? Han Sen was very happy about this, but because he had been spamming, he wasn't sure which invitation had been accepted. When he reached the battleground, he was eager to get a look at who his opponent would be. A white lion appeared across the battlefield. It was so strong, and it looked bigger than an elephant. Its body appeared to have been crafted from white jade, and its hair was like luscious silk. It looked powerful. Han Sen did not remember who this white lion might have been. If Han Sen had grown up there and met a lot of spirits and creatures along the way, though, he would have definitely known. The White Lion King was from Lion Mountain, and it was a berserk super creature. It was a famous beast all across the Fourth God's Sanctuary due to the grudge it had held against an emperor that occupied land nearby Lion Mountain. The lion had destroyed 1,000 shelters that belonged to that emperor, wiping them all off the map. The emperor fled and disappeared, never to be heard from again. The white lion Han Sen was now seeing was the heir of that White Lion King, and although its blood was not pure, its mother was a super creature, and so its genes shouldn't have been too bad. The jade-looking body it possessed came from its mother, who was called Demon Lion. It had White Lion King and Demon Lion's blood, and it had earned the creature the nickname Little Jade Lion King. It was a famous second-generational creature of the Fourth God's Sanctuary. His parents were very strong, and so was he. After running the test, his Geno core immediately hit number 11. Han Sen had challenged many Geno cores, but none had cared until now. Little Jade Lion King didn't care too much who its opponent was going to be, as this was the first time someone had willingly challenged him since he had arrived there. Little Jade Lion King stepped onto the battlefield and let out a lion roar that sounded like thunder. The entire arena trembled at the sound. Han Sen was not scared. He was actually happy. He could immediately tell it was the air of a super creature. Killing spirits on a Geno battleground was useless, but killing super creatures was useful. You could get their beast souls, their life Geno essences, and in some instances, their flesh. When the lion saw Han Sen, it looked murderous. It opened its maw and cast out a laser beam towards Han Senator. It was so fast. It came right at him. Not wanting to scare the lion off, Han Sen wasn't going to stand and block the roarborn blast. Instead, he just moved like a bird to dodge the attack. Seeing its attack had failed, the Lion King looked incredibly angry. It opened its lion mouth and continuously shot out a flurry of beams. It really wanted to kill Han Sen with its roar blasts. Han Sen continued to dodge, ever so slowly inching his way closer to the lion. He wanted to one-hit kill the fiend and keep it from running off. Real super creatures couldn't fight Han Sen, and at the end of the day, his opponent had a silver Geno core. His super spank should have been able to kill the lion in a single strike. Little Jade Lion King wasn't aware of Han Sen's purpose, and it had grown used to being the champion of its battles. No opponents of the same level had proven they had the strength to beat it. And now, because it had missed every shot at Han Sen, it decided to leap right at him. Good timing. Han Sen was so happy. He was wondering how he might get close enough to the little Jade Lion King, and he had never expected the creature to be so eager to deliver itself right to him. Han Sen's body gathered power in his right hand, imbuing it with primal magic. It was as if it could transcend the veils between space and reality. Pang! His right hand did tear through space, and it struck against the little Jade Lion King's claws. His fist went right inside, and it felt as if he had broken one of the little lion's strings. He tugged it, and then the little Jade Lion King's body turned into dust that scattered everywhere. But Han Sen thought what had occurred was strange. He hadn't heard the usual killing announcement. The fight was over, and Han Sen's crystal core leaped to number 11. It replaced Jade Lion, which had now been bumped down to 12. In the Geno core storage, a white lion's mouth was dripping with blood. It angrily said, "That be asterisk starred. How dare he destroy my Geno core Jade Lion? I'm going to kill him." Han Sen didn't know all he had done was destroy the Jade Lion Geno core, but he guessed it had to be some sort of doppelganger or something. It was a shame he hadn't been able to kill the super creature, but at least he had managed to bump himself up to the 11th rank. He had finished his current task, and he would only need to reach the top 10 next. Han Sen kept on spamming invites, but no one gave him a response. He didn't dwell on it, though, as he knew there was nothing he could do about it. Han Sen came back to send challenges each and every day, and aside from the person in first place, every participant had to challenge someone at least once a month. It was only a matter of time before Han Sen got his guaranteed turn. But strangely, he had tried challenging others for many days, and none were willing to take him up on the fight. Han Sen thought others recalled how famous Crystal Core had once been, and that was why they did not challenge him. On the next day, Han Sen entered the Geno core storage again. There, someone had challenged him. He took a look at the name and noticed it was Jade Lion. "Since I'm free, I suppose it'll be worth seeing this Jade Lion again. I'm keen to learn why I didn't kill him." Han Sen accepted the challenge. After entering the battleground, Han Sen saw Jade Lion once again. When the creature saw Han Sen, it shouted, "Who are you? Tell me your name." Han Sen was clad in armor, and he used his Dongxian aura to mask his true strength. The Jade Lion couldn't tell whether Han Sen was a spirit or a creature. "It doesn't matter who I am. All I need to do is beat you."
Han Sen smiled.
Jade Lion grunted and said, "Beat me? You can turn back now, but I'm warning you right now that your path to leveling up has come to an end. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I've only just started on this road, and the way to the top is clear of obstacles." Han Sen didn't know what Jade Lion had changed or found to make it say this. "Top?" Jade Lion laughed coldly. "I have met every combatant in the top 10, and none there will accept your challenge. You will never breach that bracket unless you beg before me, right here and right now. Then you can go. If the top 10 are stronger, why would they listen to you? Han Sen looked at the lion with surprise. Jade Lion said proudly, I am the son of White Lion King. Everyone across the fourth god's sanctuary shows me respect. You destroyed my Geno core, so if you can't make me happy, you'll never reach the top 10. Now Han Sen understood why no one was accepting his challenge requests. It wasn't because they were afraid of Crystal Core. It was because this was all a ploy orchestrated by the lion. Okay, and how can I make you happy? Han Sen smiled while looking at the lion. Give me an opportunity to release my anger, and maybe then we can talk, Jade Lion King said with a snarl. Okay. Han Sen walked towards it, but before the lion could attack, Han Sen moved. This time, Han Sen didn't use Super Spank. He used his full strength to strike the lion's chin. It sent the beast flying. Han Sen's legs were like blades, swinging through the air after that. He kept kicking the lion over and over, keeping it airborne before blowing it up in the air entirely. Blurg. In the Geno core storage, the little Jade Lion King spilled even more blood. It had spent a lot of treasure to recover its Geno core in such a short space of time. It had wanted to exact its revenge, but instead, it had been assaulted like that and then blown up. It hadn't even been given a moment to concede.
D astérisque MN.
I'm going to kill you. Little Lion King was incredibly angry. It couldn't fight Han Sen out of the Geno core storage, and it had no clue who he was. Revenge didn't seem likely. It was so mad, it called on the top 10 to refuse Han Sen's challenges no matter what. That would at least mean Han Sen would not reach the top 10. Little Jade Lion King was worried about the Geno core in second place, Shiking Blade. The ones between 3rd and 10th place were known to him, and he only had to tell them not to accept any challenges from Crystal Core. They'd listen. Shiking Blade, the one in 2nd place, belonged to a human. He had never seen the human before, but he did know that the human was strong. The spirits that challenged her would usually get killed straight away. If the person in 1st rank hadn't avoided her challenges, she would have most certainly reached 1st place already. Of course, it's okay if he challenges that human. He'll die to her anyway, Little Jade Lion King thought in anger. He had no idea Han Sen was a human, though, and Han Sen himself knew that Shiking Blade was his little sister. Han Sen observed the top 10. He was unable to challenge 1st place, and neither could he challenge the person in 2nd place, which was his sister. It looks like that lion knows how to bluff, saying I'll never be in the top 10. I don't know the others, but I do know Little Yin. I think I'll have to ask for her help, Han Sen said to himself. Han Sen left the Geno core storage and returned home. Little Yin was still in the sanctuary, so he left her a message and went back to the sanctuary himself. Han Sen was holding a life Geno essence at the time, wondering how he might absorb it. Han Sen had been researching the life Geno essences of Shell King and the Ruby Cricket, but he had yet to come up with a solution that would allow for their absorption. Han Sen tried to communicate with them, as that was what 6 Paths had once said. Unfortunately, he did not know how to obtain their approval. When he was thinking about Little Yin that day, he thought of something else. Real Blood Geno core was the power of blood, and it could control Geno cores. Perhaps it could also control life Geno essences. If Real Blood was able to control life Geno essences, then absorbing them should be fairly easy. Han Sen decided to give it a try. He brought out Shell King's life Geno essence and dropped Real Blood on it. Han Sen was nervous. Real Blood didn't seem to slide away, and it remained fixed atop the life Geno essence. It was slowly being absorbed by the item, and after an hour, only a tiny amount had managed to go inside. It seemed as if it would take at least 10 days for full control to be obtained. It looks like Real Blood Geno core is at too low of a level. That must be why it's so slow. Still, if this can lead to the absorption of the life Geno essences, it'll be great nonetheless. Han Sen was getting very excited. Han Sen hoped Real Blood would be able to control life Geno essences, so he could see if they could be absorbed. Han Sen wanted to level up his Real Blood Geno core. If he could get it up to gold class, then the process would surely be faster. After waiting 2 days, Han Yin returned from the sanctuary. When Han Yin saw the message, she had waited to see Han Sen. Big brother, why did you want me to wait for you?
Han Jan asked Han Sen.
I saw your Shiking blade on the Silver Geno Core leaderboard. Why are you number 2? Han Sen asked. Han Yin heard Han Sen and then looked angry. She said, that guy is a B** starred. He won't accept my challenge, so I can't level up. The first one was Dragon Eye, and I thought when he leveled up to gold, I could be first. But before he went, he deliberately lost to the person in 3rd place, Bloodwave. I'm only in 2nd place because he refuses to accept my challenge. Han Yin was complaining, saying if she was in 1st place, she'd have been gold class already. Ah, so you want 1st place? Han Sen squinted his eyes and looked at Han Yin. Of course. If it wasn't for the 9 reinforcements, I wouldn't be this slow. You gave me so many resources to speed me up in reaching demigod, but ever since, I've been so slow. I'm so sorry, Han Yin said.
Han Sen smiled.
This has nothing to do with your power. It's not difficult to reach the 1st rank with me, though, but you're going to have to lose once. Lose once. Han Yin looked at Han Sen with confusion, not sure what he meant. Han Sen explained, I just got to the 11th rank in silver class. But unfortunately, I offended a 2nd-generation super creature. In spite, the guy made those ahead of me refuse to accept my challenge requests. When I reach the top 10, I'll find a way to make us both number 1. Han Yin was shocked. Big brother, you only have a silver Geno core? Han Sen had shown off a crazy amount of power on planet Phantus, and she earnestly believed he had reached superclass. I have more than 1 self-Geno core, Han Sen said. 2 self-Geno cores? That's very rare. Amidst human demigods, only 2 are known to have 2 self-Geno cores. I didn't know you had 2, as well. I am going to the sanctuary now, then. I will help you get into the top 10. Han Yin then asked, by the way, what is your Geno core's name?
Crystal Core, Han Sen ansvarade.
Han Yin heard this and was shocked. She asked Han Sen, Crystal Core? The one that reached 1st place through the testing on the Bronze Geno Core and Silver Geno Core leaderboards? That was your Geno Core? Yeah. Han Sen smiled and then went on to say, but don't tell anyone else, okay? We don't want any unnecessary trouble. I understand. All right, I will go to the sanctuary now. Han Yin didn't ask how Han Sen would later reach 1st rank. Han Sen then also returned to the sanctuary and entered the Geno Core storage. There, he saw Shiking blade light up. But before Han Sen challenged Han Yin, the Jade Lion challenged him again. Han Sen didn't say anything and simply accepted the challenge invitation to see what the lion wanted. Han Sen entered the Geno battleground, and when the lion saw him, he immediately said, see? You can't enter the top 10. You are free to beg me now. Han Sen smiled and said, it's not that difficult, you know. I can go whenever I want. Pa, bluffing about this is useless. Little Jade Lion King lifted his lips. This time, though, it was clear he was keeping his distance from Han Senator. If Han Sen tried to kill him again, he could make a quick getaway to keep his newly generated Geno Core from being destroyed. You'll soon find out whether or not I'm lying. And I'm striving for more than just being in the top 10. I'm going to be first, Han Sen said coldly. If you ever do become number 1, I'll cut my head off and be your chair. Little Jade Lion King scoffed. Little Jade Lion King thought it might be possible for Han Sen to reach the top 10, but he never believed it'd be possible for him to reach the number 1 position. That was because the 1st rank belonged to Bloodwave. Bloodwave was a subordinate of Little Jade Lion King's father, White Lion. It was very possible for Little Jade Lion King to reach 1st place, for when he did reach the top 10, his challenge against Bloodwave would be accepted. Han Sen had no way of challenging Bloodwave, so his opportunity for reaching 1st place seemed unlikely. Han Sen laughed and said, you don't need to cut your head off. But, if I do reach the top, how about you obey and serve me? Little Jade Lion King was enraged by this, and he said, okay, and if you are unable to reach 1st place, how about you obey me? Sure, that sounds fair.
Han Sen nodded.
Okay, if you reach 1st place, I will consider you my master. Otherwise, I will become your master, Little Jade Lion King said fiercely. He wasn't dumb, and he insisted on a time limit of 1 day. Then it is settled. If you lose, don't think about fleeing.
Han Sen låg head.
Who do you think I am? Everything I speak is the truth, Little Jade Lion King said proudly. He was confident that Han Sen would never achieve first place while Bloodwave was there, and Bloodwave would never accept a challenge from anyone except Little Jade Lion King. So, do you want to concede? Or do I need to force you out?
Han Sen sighed.
Enjoy this boisterous attitude for one more day. On the next, you will be totally screwed, Little Jade Lion King said angrily, then stomped out of the battleground by conceding. Han Sen went back to the Geno core storage to accept the challenge Han Yin had already sent him. After accepting Han Yin's challenge, he entered the battleground again and met Han Yin there. When Han Yin saw Han Sen, she was so happy. Big brother, you really are the master of crystal core? Let me see how strong a core must be to put you on top through the test alone. No. Han Sen didn't want to hide things from her, as there shouldn't have been anything he had to hide from his sister. Han Sen thought the crystal core looked like an egg, and its appearance alone made it difficult to believe it was the almighty crystal core. He actually thought it was embarrassing that a man's Geno core was an egg. Are you going to hide something from your cute sister?
Han Yen lifted her lips.
Today is not a good day. But how about I show you another Geno core a little later?
Han Sen cocked head.
I've seen your other one. There's nothing else for me to see. Han Yin did not force him, though. After they talked for a bit more, she eventually conceded. Then, Han Sen was able to take her second position, and the Shi-King blade fell to third place. Little Jade Lion stared at the leaderboard, eager to see what Han Sen was doing. Suddenly, the leaderboard flashed. Shi-King blade, which had previously been in second place, fell down a rank, and then Crystal Core took her place. Something is wrong with this human. Is that asterisk Shoal another human, too? Did he pay her off with something, so they could switch position? Little Jade Lion King's face looked grim. The biggest risk he had taken in his wager with Han Sen was the other human on the leaderboard, and now she had proven that she really was a liability. It made him furious. But even if you do get to second place, it's pointless. You'll have no hope of replacing the core that's currently in first place. Little Jade Lion King, thinking about this, suddenly felt much better. Just in case, though, Jade Little Lion King decided to exit the Geno core storage. He went looking for Bloodwave so he could stay next to him, in the event something tricky happened. I'm not letting Bloodwave out of my sight. After today, I'm going to kick that guy's asterisk S. Little Jade Lion King was getting himself worked up as he thought about Han Sen again. Han Sen took the second position. He didn't say goodbye to Han Yin, and he simply left the Geno core storage. Then, he used Real Blood as a key for re-entry. Han Sen planned to use Real Blood to leapfrog to first place. Then, with Real Blood, he would lose to Han Yin. Then, Han Yin could lose to the Crystal Core, and all the Geno cores could have their 9 reinforcements. Han Sen had a few other Geno cores, but he could only use one Geno core at a time, and he could not challenge himself. Since he had Han Yin there to back him up, though, it was no longer an issue. Starting test. Han Sen didn't speak to the Rockman. He simply allowed it to go ahead and calculate the starting rank. Rockman's third eye fired a light at the Real Blood Geno core as numbers scrolled quickly. Little Jade Lion King was talking with Bloodwave in Lionheart Shelter at the time, and all of a sudden, Bloodwave blurted out, "Oh no, what happened?" Little Jade Lion asked him, frowning. "I lost my first position in the Geno core storage." Bloodwave looked ill. "How? You're kidding, right? You were here. How could you lose your place?" Little Jade Lion's heart jolted. "I don't know, Little King. Let's enter and find out," Bloodwave said. Little Jade Lion and Bloodwave quickly scrambled into the Geno core storage. They looked at who was in first place, and they were frozen. The first position of the Silver Geno core leaderboard was no longer occupied by Bloodwave. It now read, Real Blood. No way. How is that possible? Little Jade Lion was frozen. Han Sen's Real Blood Geno core reached first place through the placement test. Without hesitating, after reaching that first place, Han Sen sent a challenge request to Han Yin. Han Yin was wondering what Han Sen might be able to do for them both to touch the top rank, and as she thought, the request for a challenge popped up. She wasn't in the mood for an actual challenge, so she planned on declining it. But then she saw the name of the Geno core. It looked very familiar. Real Blood? Real blood. Han Yin suddenly thought of something. She looked over to the leaderboard and noticed Blood Wave had dropped down to second place, having been replaced by this Real Blood. 10 years ago, Real Blood reached first place in the Bronze Geno Core leaderboard. Now it has appeared here? No way. Han Yin's eyes opened wide, as if she was seeing something unbelievable. Han Yin accepted the challenge and entered the Geno battleground with excitement. There, she saw Han Sen standing. Big brother, how is this possible? The Real Blood Geno Core is yours? You have 3 self-Geno Cores? Han Yin had always thought Han Sen was strong. He was her role model, after all. But even for him, this was shocking. 2 Geno Cores that managed to leapfrog to first place had been owned by Han Sen, and Han Sen had a Super Geno Core on top of all that. He was like a monster, and few people would even be willing to believe such tall tales. If other people find out Crystal Core and Real Blood are owned by the same person, I fear the entire populace of spirits and creatures in the 4th God Sanctuary would go insane. Han Yin felt proud, knowing this was an accomplishment of her big brother, her idol. I'll give you first place. Then, I'll challenge you again with Crystal Core, Han Sen said and then conceded, leaving the Geno Core storage shortly after. Han Sen couldn't explain everything in a couple of short sentences, so he couldn't be bothered to say anything else. Han Sen re-entered the Geno Core storage and challenged Han Yin's Shiking Blade. Crystal Core was back on top, and it received its 9th reinforcement. Now the Silver Geno Core leaderboard displayed Crystal Core at the top, then Shiking Blade, Real Blood, and Blood Wave. Blood Wave was out of the top 3 now. When Little Jade Lion King and Blood Wave entered the Geno Core storage, they saw the rankings and were stunned. They could not believe what their eyes were telling them, and they were wholly frozen in place. How is that possible? No way. Little Jade Lion could not think straight. He did not know how Han Sen had actually reached first place while Blood Wave wasn't even in the Geno Core storage. The others in the Geno Core storage saw Real Blood suddenly jump up into the number 1 slot, and they all knew what had happened. The top rankings now kicked off a big fuss. Everyone wondered who the masters of Real Blood, Shiking Blade, and Crystal Core were, and if they were in any way related. There were many wild conjectures, but the thought that Crystal Core and Real Blood actually had the same master did not even cross their minds. Normal people didn't think it was Han Sen because he had already shown off his Butterfly Geno Core in the Alliance. Many people had a video of the battle. Because everyone thought Han Sen had a Super Geno Core, no one would link him to 2 minor by comparison Silver Geno Cores. If Han Sen didn't say anything, no one would know he had 4 self-Geno Cores. After leaving the Geno Core storage, he started to use his Gold Core Lights to level up Real Blood Geno Core to Gold Class. The Gold Class Real Blood Geno Core did not look very different. It still looked like a simple drop of blood, but the interior of the core began to look a little strange. There was a flicker of gold within it, like the sunset. In Han Sen's body, his Blood Pulse Sutra leveled up with his Real Blood Geno Core. His body was improving as well. The Real Blood Geno Core, which had just appeared on the Silver Geno Core leaderboard, now disappeared. It had only been there for an hour. Han Sen tried using his Real Blood Geno Core to absorb life Geno essences again. Now that it was Gold Class, it spread across the items incredibly quickly. Within 2 days, the life Geno essences would be wholly soaked by Real Blood. I hope I will be able to absorb it when it is soaked. Han Sen wasn't in the mood to do anything else over the course of the next couple of days. He stared at the Shell King's life Geno essence to pass the time. Real Blood worked more quickly than Han Sen had expected, and after 36 hours, the life Geno essence had been wholly covered by Real Blood. Han Sen felt when the connection was completed, and then it was as if the life Geno essence was an extension of his being. Han Sen tried to run his Dongxian Sutra to absorb the life Geno essence next. He didn't even need to simulate the Shell King's life force. Life Geno essence absorbed. Super Geno points +1. Hearing this voice, Han Sen became incredibly excited. He could finally start collecting Super Geno points once again. Haha, I'm going to max out my Super Geno points again. Han Sen looked to the sky as he laughed. He was supremely happy. External power could be handy, but it was the power that resided inside your body that was the most reliable. Han Sen was extremely excited about leveling his genes up further. The energy inside the life geno essence entered Han Sen's body. The cells that had stopped evolving began to improve, and his genes were getting better already. In the end, Shell King's life geno essence gave Han Sen a total of 9 super geno points. And after Han Sen absorbed the Shell King's life geno essence, he placed his real blood on the Ruby Cricket's life geno essence. Little Jade Lion was very unhappy about all this. After Crystal Core reached first place, he ran straight out of the Geno Core storage. He didn't want to go back inside, as he was now afraid Han Sen would seek him out. He did not want to accept Han Sen as his master, but he wasn't obscene enough to deny such a bargain ever took place. Spirits, creatures, and humans all valued different things. To the White Lion family, loyalty, bravery, and trust were of the greatest importance. That was why Little Lion's mind was in 2 halves. Little King, the time to go to the ice ruins has practically come. Have you sufficiently prepared? Bloodwave came to ask Little Lion. The ice ruins are opening? Little Jade Lion was shocked. Yes. Lion Boss asked you to get going to the ice ruins tomorrow, Bloodwave said. Little Lion nodded and said, okay. At least very little will trouble me. Will you come? Bloodwave nodded and said, I can come with you. Tooth Beast, as well. He will be in charge of keeping you safe, but that will only apply outside the ruins. Once we're in, grabbing the treasure is down to you and me. Of course. Who else, of this same level, could possibly be stronger than us? Little Jade Lion spoke proudly, but his mind did drift to Han Sen. As this was happening, Han Sen was simply waiting for the Ruby Cricket's life geno essence to get completely soaked. But before it was absorbed, Shadow Shelter's Cheap Sheep delivered a report. A creature had paid them a visit, asking to see Han Senator. They were told he was a good friend of Han Sen's. No way! After Han Sen heard Cheap Sheep describe the creature, his mouth opened wide. Han Sen quickly walked to the shelter's hall. There, he saw a creature floating inside. Little fairy? You're a demigod now? Han Sen looked at the small, fairy-like lady with surprise. What? Only you are allowed to be a demigod, and I'm not. Little fairy lifted her lips. It seemed as if she didn't like what he had just said. No, I just didn't expect you to ascend so quickly.
Han Sen smiled.
Han Sen had first encountered Little Fairy in the second God's Sanctuary, not the third God's Sanctuary. For a creature, leveling up was a much more arduous process than it was for a human. Han Sen was genuinely surprised she had become a demigod already. I became a demigod before you did. Little Fairy looked at him with disdain. Han Sen then realized why he hadn't seen Little Fairy in the third God's Sanctuary. It was because she had already become a demigod. How did you find out where I've been staying? Han Sen asked Little Fairy. The fourth God's Sanctuary was massive, after all. That does not matter, but I found you because I know something that will interest you. Little Fairy smiled. What good deeds can you do for me? Forgive my dubiousness, Han Sen said. Little Fairy was a heartless little creature, and she never even looked back when she ascended to the third God's Sanctuary. She just followed the other person through. Han Sen didn't trust her, and he couldn't imagine her going out of her way to do something nice for him. Little Fairy looked visibly annoyed, and she said, You are a really unappreciative person. I came all this way to take you to God's ruin. I thought you'd benefit from the venture, but never mind then. I'm going now. Little Fairy said she was going, but her wings flapped at a snail's pace. She wasn't leaving anywhere. Drop the act and just tell me what this is all about, Han Sen said. Little Fairy hadn't changed a bit, and her personality was the same as always. The only difference was that she was now smarter and stronger. Little Fairy didn't feel awkward, and she explained why she was there. She had been living well for herself. When she ascended to the third God's Sanctuary, a powerful spirit had taken her. After a few years, it had helped her open 10 gene locks, and when the spirit ascended to the fourth God's Sanctuary, it brought her along. Little Fairy was living a nice life. She wasn't doing as well as she had in the third God's Sanctuary, but she had managed to reach Gemstone class. She was very talented and powerful, and the spirit continued to help her. It was a good thing that Little Fairy had come looking for Han Senator. She wanted Han Sen to go to God's ruin with her. God's ruin was a sacred place in the fourth God's Sanctuary. The item that was said to lie inside possessed a power that distorted dimensions. This was what made it special. The item had other powers as well, and it appeared in a number of different locations. Little Fairy was journeying to a ruin that was covered in ice. The place's power was based on ice, just like Little Fairy herself. So, Little Fairy fancied testing her luck to see if she could get the item. If she didn't get it, there was still plenty of stuff for them to get there. She wasn't lying to Han Sen. Many would enjoy visiting such a place. Won't it be suicide for us to go with the power we have?
Han Sen asket kvietlu.
Little Fairy smiled and said, if super-class elites were allowed, I wouldn't have come looking for you. It only lets gemstones and those below inside. Well, in that case, I guess there's no harm in trying, Han Sen said. Don't hesitate. Let's go. The heirs of many elites will be headed there. Those from a variety of super shelters, Little Fairy said. Han Sen wanted to go, but he didn't know if he could still enter the ruin if he had a God Geno core. A God Geno core was a super Geno core. If entry was restricted to gemstone Geno cores only, he might not be allowed inside. Han Sen, after thinking things over, decided to give it a shot, regardless. A God Geno core was different from a self Geno core, so maybe there was a chance he'd be allowed inside. Even if he couldn't, he might learn something by going along with the venture for the time being. Are there any people from Outer Sky or Sacred going? Han Sen asked. Yeah, Yu Miao from Outer Sky is going, and so is Goddess from Sacred, Little Fairy said, after thinking. Okay, I'll follow you. When Han Sen heard those two were going, he definitely wanted in. Han Sen wasn't on pleasant terms with either of those women, but it would be ridiculous for Han Sen to go to their respective shelters to try to kill them. Even if Han Sen didn't earn any relics or items, killing them would make this trip worth it. That was especially true for Goddess and her sheepdog. He wanted nothing more than to slice them both up. But Han Sen still worried about whether or not he'd be able to go in. If he couldn't, there was nothing he could do. Han Sen wasn't afraid of the potential fallout from killing them both, though. Shadow Shelter now had Gu Qingqing and Red Pony for backup. They were powerful. Gu Qingqing was a powerful person from Elysium Shelter, and since she feared Red Pony, it couldn't possibly be any weaker. Even if Outer Sky and Sacred came after Shadow Shelter, it was difficult to tell which of the two would win. And Outer Sky knew Gu Qingqing had taken over Shadow Shelter, too. They hadn't dared to send anyone there, and they didn't know Han Sen had returned to control it now. Han Sen packed a few things. He wasn't going to bring anyone, but Bauer, Little Silver, and Starsea Beast caught wind of his venture and wanted to come along. When Little Fairy saw Little Silver and Starsea Beast, her eyes beamed brightly. She convinced Han Sen to bring them along for additional firepower. Cheap Sheep and Green Cow were loyal, and they wanted to go, too. But Little Fairy turned them down in case they died. Little Silver and Starsea Beast have gemstone Geno cores, so we can bring them. They aren't weaker than any super creature's heir. If I can go, they shouldn't have to worry about anything. Han Sen thought about it and decided to let them come. But Han Sen thought that if he was unable to go inside, he wouldn't risk them going inside alone. It'd be too dangerous. Plus, Han Sen was still worried about Little Fairy. There was always the possibility that she was trying to trick them. Han Sen packed some things and followed Little Fairy to God's ruin. Bauer, Little Silver, and Starsea Beast were coming along with them, as well. Starsea Beast had grown much bigger by now. Its body was big like that of a dinosaur's. But even so, its eyes remained as innocent-looking as ever. Every time Han Sen saw them, it made him feel as if he was meeting the eyes of a child. Bauer had been staying in Han Sen's arms for the trip, not wanting Little Silver to come any closer. But Little Silver just jumped onto Han Sen's head instead, looking like a fur cap. It sat there, waving its fluffy tail merrily. That really aggravated Bauer. In the time that Han Sen had been in the Fourth God Sanctuary, he hadn't traveled or explored very far. As a result, Little Fairy had to lead the entire way. Little Fairy knew the way, though, and there were no dangers along their path. It made for a pleasant and relaxing journey. After walking for half a month, the terrain around them became decked in snow. To the north of where they stood, enormous glaciers reached up into the sky like crystal swords. Little Fairy lowered her voice at that point, and she told Han Sen, There is a scary creature guarding the entrance of the god's ruin. We will need its permission if we are to enter. We are weak, and because we don't know its full strength, we won't be able to go through him if he refuses to let us pass. Han Sen had expected Little Fairy to not be 100% reliable. He had prepared himself for unannounced challenges, and so he said coolly, "Still, you must have a plan? Why else would you come and fetch us?" Little Fairy blinked. She flew onto Han Sen's shoulders, smiled, and said, "You know me well. If we go straight ahead, we won't be able to make it in. What we can do is sneak inside." "And how do we sneak inside?" Han Sen asked. God's ruin is veiled in a special power of sorts, one that cannot be broken by others. The primary entrance is an opening in the valley, where the creature also resides. That's the entrance we won't be able to go through. After a pause, Little Fairy said, "But aside from that opening in the valley, I know of another way that can be accessed. It is to the northwest of the glaciers. We can get in from there, but what?" Han Sen asked. Han Sen could guess the spirits and creatures would still select the ordinary way through the valley, because Little Fairy's proposed route was likely harder. He wasn't expecting anything to be easy. Little Fairy shrugged and said, "There are no scary creatures guarding that way, but there are dangerous plants called frozen trees. We must go through the frozen forest that is 800 miles long. Only then can we get in." "Tell me more about the plants," Han Sen said. "They are super plants attuned to the ice element, and their attunement with ice is very strong. Normal gemstone creatures that step into the forest are instantly frozen, and even super creatures and the heirs of emperors are unable to stay inside for very long. If you are frozen, you cannot even commit suicide. The scariest thing is that this area is also a part of the ruins, and the super class beings aren't able to get in, either." After that, Little Fairy smiled. "Don't worry, though. I'm good with ice. With me here, I can assure you safe passage through the forest. If I wasn't sure of this, I wouldn't have asked you to come here." "Okay, let's take the path through the frozen forest." Han Sen didn't say anything more and just nodded. Little Fairy was surprised that Han Sen was so quick to agree. She was touched by this, and she said, "If you guys are so willing to trust me, I'll bring you safer than ever."
Han Sen smiled.
He didn't trust Little Fairy, and his faith still solely resided in himself. Even without Little Fairy, Han Sen knew he could keep himself and the others protected. The only thing he was still concerned with was whether he could enter at all. If he wasn't allowed to go in, everything would have been for nothing. Little Fairy didn't say anything more, and she just brought Han Sen over to the Glacier Mountains and then went northwest. Han Sen watched the Glacier Mountains for a while, and he could see the jutting of numerous peaks. He also sensed a certain aura of power shrouding the mountains, too. When they entered the fields of snow, it was snowing 80% of the time there. It was a very cold place to tread. Fairy wanted the others to believe in her, so she controlled the descending snow to divert each snowflake from falling on her companions. She wanted to show she really was good when it came to the ice element. "Where is the spirit that brought you to the fourth god's sanctuary? Was she unable to come?" Han Sen asked, out of mild curiosity. If the spirit hadn't leveled up to super, then it should have come as well. If it was super, it could have at least talked to the creature in the valley and allowed her simple access that way. Little Fairy immediately looked glum, and she said, "She died. She was killed by a powerful elite. Even though she was very strong, I suppose not even the mightiest of beings can deny a grisly fate, if that is what awaits them." Han Sen was surprised. To be able to bring Little Fairy to the fourth god's sanctuary, the spirit must have been immensely strong. The person that was able to kill her must have been incredibly powerful. "Who killed her?" Han Sen asked. Little Fairy shook her head. She gritted her teeth and said, "I will kill that asterisk shoal. That's why I need to level up to super and grab the relic inside. If I can't do this, then I will be unable to avenge her death." Han Sen did not say anything. Little Fairy's expression was enough to show that her master spirit's death had really done a number on her. She really wanted revenge. But the opponent would be very powerful, and Little Fairy's vengeance would be supremely difficult to achieve. She might even end up getting herself killed. After a few more days of traveling through the snow, they arrived at the frozen forest just as Little Fairy had said. There were many frozen, ice-wrought trees in there. They were like the immense crystal sculptures one might read about in fairy tales. The freezing force of that place would have been able to instantly freeze anything in a 10-mile radius. Some parts of the frozen forest extended beyond the glaciers, but many of the trees were also inside the glaciers themselves. That was why Little Fairy said the frozen forest was part of God's ruin. It made sense. Let's go. Little Fairy looked disheartened. Outside her body, a glowing snowflake appeared and expanded to provide cover for them all. Under the protection of that snowflake, they were all warmed. They no longer felt the chill of the outside. Han Sen felt relieved as he walked through the frozen forest, as this was proof he really could go into God's ruin. They walked into the frozen forest, and Han Sen did not feel cold due to the warming boon imparted by Little Fairy. He did feel a little uncomfortable, though. As soon as he entered the area, he felt as if he was being watched, like a pair of eyes was fixed on him. Although they were still under Little Fairy's protection, as they traveled deeper into the forest, the chill of the cold began to return, ever so slightly. Even Little Fairy was struggling to withstand the pressure of the freezing force. Most of the cold air was held back, but some gusts managed to break through. Fortunately, Han Sen's fitness was high enough to resist it doing any harm. Han Sen continued to look around as he went. He had his Dongxian aura firing on all cylinders as he tried to find out what was watching him. The frozen forest was very strange. It was no wonder the area was a part of God's ruin. Despite giving it his all, Han Sen's Dongxian aura could only cover a 100-meter radius. He couldn't see anything beyond that. And furthermore, he was unable to see where something might have been watching from. As they traveled deeper into the forest, the sensation of being watched continued to increase. Han Sen kept a permanent frown on his face. It wasn't a good thing to know you were being watched in such a perilous place as God's ruin. This area's security is high, but surely nothing can stay here for very long, Han Sen was thinking. Soon, Little Fairy quietly shouted, "Be careful! Something is up ahead." Han Sen, Little Silver, and Starsea Beast looked over in the direction she was referring to. Something was moving through the frozen forest. The Dongxian aura wasn't very helpful there, so Han Sen had to resort to his basic, no-frills eyesight. Now, he was seeing things like Little Silver did. Since they were already there, it wasn't as if there was a point in heading back, either. So, Han Sen looked at Little Fairy and continued walking. Unsure of what lay ahead, and wishing to find out, they exercised more caution as they moved forward. Not long after, the shadow in the woods became clearer to them. It was a 1-meter-tall seahorse. Its body looked to be completely made of ice, and it wriggled as it floated by, as if it was swimming through the air. It was silent in its passing. The ice seahorse saw the group, but it did not appear to be hostile. It just continued floating by, on its way to wherever it was going. "Daddy, look. Many seahorses. So beautiful." Bauer was pointing at the other side of the forest with a happy expression. Han Sen looked over to where Bauer was pointing, and he noticed there were 20 or 30 seahorses floating around in the same manner. The smallest one was only a meter tall, but there were others amidst them of various sizes. The tallest one they could see was 4 meters high. As the creatures bobbed forward, they looked almost funny. The seahorses looked very tame, and they all seemed to want to keep to themselves. Han Sen was curious about them, but his Dongxian aura had been stifled by God's ruin, so he couldn't tell what power resided inside the seahorses. Bauer laughed and jumped onto the back of one of the ice seahorses. She held onto its neck like it was an average mare. Han Sen was shocked by her actions, and he wished to call her back immediately. They did look tame, yes, but who knew if they would remain so docile after being provoked? Little Fairy made a hushed call. Han Sen turned to look at her, and he noticed she was staring at something that was behind the ice seahorse. The expression on her face made it look as if she had seen a ghost. Han Sen looked over there and was shocked as well. Behind the ice seahorse was another bunch of seahorses. The heads of these seahorses were bigger, and they were all at least 4 meters tall. Their bodies looked to have been made of black diamonds, and they looked hardier than steel. They were different from the other ice seahorses that the group had previously observed. Strangely, there was a chain as thick as a human's arm wrapped around the black seahorses' bodies. It looked like a steel chain, and there were many symbols engraved into the metal. There weren't many black seahorses, and Han Sen was able to count 11 of them. They all looked the same. They floated in the air, but they weren't doing so as randomly as the other ice seahorses were. They were all aligned, traveling in perfect tandem with each other. Behind the black seahorses, their chains all seemed to connect to something. It was a big, black chimenea that was 8 meters tall. It looked like a tall black furnace. The chute had blue flames coming out of it, which were burning fiercely inside it. But strangely, Han Sen couldn't feel any warmth coming from it. And when the chimenea came closer, they actually felt colder. It was as if it was releasing cold instead of heat. The strong, icy force was getting stronger, and even with the shielding provided by Little Fairy, Han Sen felt extremely cold. Not even her control of the ice element was able to protect them from that abhorrent force. Everyone was trying their best to resist the cold with the power they had, but it didn't seem to be working very well. Slowly, they were all beginning to freeze. "We should run and wait until the chimenea has passed. We can come back later," Han Sen said. Little Fairy agreed, as did the others. They were all of the mind to vacate the area at once, but unfortunately, their bodies weren't listening. Their legs were sheathed in a layer of ice. Quickly, that ice was spreading across their bodies. None of them were able to move. They felt as if they were robots, only able to move a tiny amount. Only Bauer, who was sitting upon the back of an ice seahorse, was okay. Everyone was shocked by what was going on, so Han Sen summoned his God Geno core. It spawned ruby wings behind him, and his whole being began to glow red. That power pushed the cold back outside of him and kept the icy force from affecting him. Han Sen wanted to bring his companions away, too, in case something even worse was about to happen. But suddenly, they saw the black seahorses stop pulling the chimenea. Then, they all looked at Han Sen. Han Sen's heart jumped, and he said, "Oh, no. Has my performance made them hostile to me?" It was then that Han Sen realized they weren't looking at him. They were looking at Bauer, who was back on his shoulder. Bauer was not affected by the cold at all, and she sat on Han Sen's shoulder, dangling her legs. She was checking out the black seahorses and their black chimenea. When the black seahorses looked at Bauer, they did not do anything. They simply resumed pulling the chimenea and kept on moving. They moved at a faster pace this time, though, and within a few seconds, they had crossed a great distance. When the big chimenea left the area, the freezing force reduced. The accumulated frost began to fade, and the ice that trapped Han Sen's companions began to thaw. That was way too scary. What was that? When Little Fairy had recovered, she spoke with a look of fear. They both had mastery of the cold. Little Fairy had reached gemstone class, so she should have still had some resistance against superclass foes. But even with her strength, her body was frozen stiff by that chilling instrument. "It's none of our business. Come on, let's keep going." Han Sen put away his God Geno core and headed deeper into the frozen forest. Little Fairy looked at Han Sen strangely. She had ice powers, yet she could not resist the frosty air. The fact that Han Sen could move amidst it without restraint surprised her a lot. Han Sen, as they went, still felt as if something or someone was watching him. But when they exited the frozen forest, no trouble occurred. They were able to safely enter God's ruin proper. The ruins were chock full of glaciers. It was as if they had entered an ice world. The surroundings were so clean and so virgin, it almost made them feel uncomfortable. The reflective surface of the snow was so intense that it made the group dizzy, and their eyes struggled to cope with the glare. Although Han Sen and the others had a strong fitness and wouldn't be permanently affected by this, he still pulled out 3 pairs of sunglasses. One for him, one for Bauer, and one for Little Silver. Starsea Beast's eyes were too big, and try as he might, he hadn't been able to find a pair suitable for that companion. "Didn't you say there is a tunnel inside the ruin? Where is it?" Han Sen asked Little Fairy. The godlight tunnel was formed by the relic they sought, and they would only truly notice the relic's special power once they entered the godlight tunnel. And when their bodies went against that power, their bodies would become stronger. The reinforcement would not appear in your data, but it would help your body, nonetheless. Han Sen thought Yu Miaoan Goddess would make for the godlight tunnel. So, that was his next targeted destination. Even if he was unable to find the pair, Han Sen could at least make use of the tunnel for practice. I think it's on the left. Perhaps we'll reach the Godlight Tunnel in 1,000 miles that way, Little Fairy said, while looking around. What do you mean by perhaps?
Han Sen frov ned.
Little Fairy opened her arms and said, I've never been here. I've only heard of this place, and if the intel I obtained was correct, it's 1,000 miles to the left. Han Sen just nodded and did not say anything. Starsea Beast lowered his body and let Han Sen, Little Silver, and Bower mount his back. Then he took them in the direction Little Fairy had told them to go. While Starsea Beast ran, stars appeared all around them like a shining sea. He was very fast, and while Starsea Beast was huge, he wasn't clumsy. He gave the illusion that he was dumb, but his agility was high. Slow down. This is God's ruin, and there are sure to be many dangers lurking here. Little Fairy flew up beside Han Sen and warned Starsea Beast. Han Sen didn't let Starsea Beast adhere to the warning, though, and it trotted on at the same speedy pace. He was no longer afraid of the potential dangers of the ruin. More than anything, Han Sen wanted to see if traveling quickly would make the feeling of being watched go away. But it turned out not to help. Despite Starsea Beast's incredible quickness, that constant feeling of being watched remained. Han Sen had thought that they might leave the Watcher behind in the frozen forest, but that didn't seem to have happened. He was being watched with every step he made inside God's ruin, as well. Does this mean the relic itself has a mind of its own, and it can keep tabs on all occupants of the ruin? Han Sen thought this might have been the only possibility. Han Sen didn't think the super elites in the Fourth God's Sanctuary could possess the power the relic seemed to have, should his theory prove true. Han Sen's God Geno Core put him in superclass, but this did not change things for him in the ruin at all. If the relic is watching us, then there is no need to worry. Many creatures have been to this place before. Sure, a bunch of them may have gotten unlucky, but most were able to make it back out. I don't think the relic's intent is to kill people. Han Sen was deep in thought. But still, why is it watching us? Is it simply curious? Or is it looking for a particular type of person? If it wants to find someone in particular, shouldn't it search for a super elite? But if that were so, why doesn't it allow supers to enter God's ruin? Han Sen did not understand, so he stopped thinking. He let Starsea Beast slow down a bit, and the creature continued on its way towards the Godlight Tunnel. Not long after, they heard the sounds of a battle. It sounded fairly vicious. When Han Sen heard it, his face changed and he said, "Six Paths is here. Who is he up against that's making him fight like that?" Han Sen was familiar with Six Paths' sword skills, and just from hearing the sound of the clanging, he knew who it was. Strangely, Six Paths was exhausting all the energy he had for this fight. Six Paths' Geno Core hadn't yet gotten back to super class, but his body was up there. To be able to fight Six Paths with such vigor, his opponent must have had a super body. I thought those above gemstone level can't get in? Why is there such a strong elite in God's ruin? Is it another elite that destroyed himself to start all over again? Han Sen hesitated a little, but he still allowed Starsea Beast to proceed. He wanted to see who Six Paths was fighting. The fighting was fierce, and the glaciers began to break. They were special glaciers, too, and they'd be difficult even for a gemstone elite to break. Through this metric, you could tell how powerful the fighters must have been. When Han Sen neared the site of the battle, he saw two beings engaged in combat. One of them was indeed Six Paths Emperor, who was gemstone class. His sword was more frightening than ever. Six Paths was fighting a human, and when Han Sen saw the person, his eyes opened wide in shock. He knew who it was.